Hey everyone, I'm AfterMoon Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. We were laughing too loudly when it happened, the kind of nervous laughter that comes from being somewhere we shouldn't be. There were 5 of us, me, my cousin Rayhan, our friends Faraz and Imran, and Rayhan's younger sister Aisha walking deeper into the pine forests near Murray. It was late afternoon, and we'd taken a smaller trail off the main road because Rayhan swore he knew a shortcut to an abandoned rest house. He always had that adventurous streak, and we usually followed. The path narrowed until the trees leaned in so close they brushed our shoulders, but then it opened to what looked like an old road, half swallowed by moss and vines. That's when the laughter stopped. The first thing I noticed was the car, a faded white Suzuki, parked at a strange angle as though someone had stopped suddenly. Its headlights glowed in the dim forest light, beams catching the green mist that rose from the damp ground. The hood radiated warmth when I placed my palm on it, yet the inside was empty. No bags. No driver. Just the faint tick of the cooling engine. Maybe someone went for a walk? Aisha suggested, though her voice sounded uncertain. Without turning off the car? I replied. Faraz circled the car and kicked the tires, muttering, "Keys are gone. Weird." Imran called us over to look ahead. There were more vehicles further down the road. A blue Corolla with its doors wide open, hazard lights clicking, battery still alive. A small van parked sideways, windshield smeared as if someone had wiped it frantically with their hands. The forest pressed closer here, branches heavy with moss, the air unnaturally quiet. We didn't joke anymore. We moved slowly, like we'd stepped into something we weren't supposed to see. My heart kept stuttering at each new sight, a child's shoe in the road, a spilled grocery bag with apples half rotten, a thermos still steaming slightly when Rayhan picked it up. "No one just leaves food warm like this," Rayhan whispered. That's when Aisha tugged at my arm. "Listen," she said. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it was humming. A low, collective hum, faint, like dozens of people chanting in the distance. The sound came from further down the moss road. Every hair on my arm stood up. We argued in whispers. Faraz wanted to turn back immediately, said this was none of our business. Rayhan, stubborn as always, insisted we'd regret not finding out. Aisha clutched my sleeve and said she had a bad feeling that we should leave. But I admit, curiosity won in me too. We'd already seen too much for it to be coincidence, so we went on. The road curved, and the trees grew thicker until they nearly formed a tunnel. We followed the humming, stepping past more vehicles, a bus, its headlights flickering on and off, a motorcycle still idling with its chain, rattling faintly, a bicycle leaning upright as though the rider had just stepped away. Every engine was alive, every machine warm, yet not a single person was there. The hum grew louder, almost vibrating the air, until my teeth ached. Finally, we reached a clearing. At first, I thought it was mist rising from the ground, but then I saw them figures standing shoulder to shoulder, packed in rows, their heads bowed, humming. Men, women, children, all silent except for that awful vibrating sound. They didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even blink. The air around them shimmered faintly, like heat off asphalt. We froze. No one dared breathe loudly. Then Rayhan, damn him, whispered, "What the hell is this?" The nearest figure, an old man in a wool vest, lifted his head. His eyes were open, but empty, like glass. The humming grew sharper, almost angry. One by one, the others raised their faces. Every single one of them looked straight at us. Aisha gasped. That tiny sound broke whatever barrier there had been. The figures moved, not stepped, not walked, but glided toward us, their feet dragging unnaturally slow while their upper bodies leaned forward. The humming turned into a rising drone that shook my chest. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Aisha's wrist. We bolted back down the moss road, stumbling over vines and broken asphalt. Behind us, I could hear the drone chasing, a sound more than footsteps, vibrating closer. The cars we had passed earlier seemed to multiply, lining the road like a graveyard of abandoned journeys. Engines revved as we passed, headlights flared, horns blared on their own, filling the forest with chaos. Faraz screamed when one of the cars rocked violently, doors slamming as though invisible hands tried to trap him. He nearly slipped, but Imran pulled him along. My lungs burned, legs shaking, yet the fear drove me faster. Aisha clung to me, sobbing, as we tore through the overgrowth. Somewhere ahead, Rehan shouted, "This way." He'd found a small path, veering off the moss road. We didn't hesitate. Branches ripped at our clothes as we forced ourselves into the narrower trail. The drone behind us grew muffled, though it didn't stop. We burst back onto the main hiking trail where we'd started. The normal forest sounds returned, crows cawing, wind rustling. My knees gave out, and I collapsed, gasping. Aisha fell beside me, shaking uncontrollably, but Rehan wasn't with us. I looked back toward the narrow path, expecting him to appear. Seconds stretched into a minute. Imran swore under his breath and darted back, shouting Rehan's name. The forest answered with silence. No drone now, no footsteps, only the normal quiet. We waited another 10 minutes, calling, searching along the path but never daring to step back onto the moss road. There was nothing, no sound, no trace. It was as though Rehan had never been with us. We finally left, half carrying Aisha, who had gone nearly limp with shock. None of us spoke on the way back down to town. We reached Marie near dusk, and the sight of shopkeepers arguing over tea, and children chasing each other in the street felt unreal, like another world. That night, we called Rehan's phone 100 times. No answer. The police laughed at our story, said he probably wandered off. They searched a little, but they found nothing. They told us no such road existed where we claimed. When we tried to return days later, we couldn't find the trail again. It was gone, swallowed by the forest. Weeks passed, then months. Rehan's parents stopped asking me for details because my answers never changed. The others, Faraz and Imran, refused to talk about it at all. Aisha withdrew, speaking only when necessary, her eyes hollow. Years later, I sometimes dream of that moss road. In the dream, the cars are still there, engines idling, lights piercing the green mist. And Rehan stands among the figures in the clearing, head bowed, humming with them. When he lifts his face to me, his eyes are glassy and empty, just like the others. I wish I could dismiss it as imagination, but I can still feel the heat of that Suzuki's hood on my palm, the tick of its cooling engine. I can still hear the horns blaring as we ran. Machines don't come alive on their own. People don't vanish into thin air. The truth is simple and horrible. We saw something real, a place where the world breaks open and swallows those unlucky enough to find it. And Rehan is still there, humming, waiting for the day when maybe I'll join him. I tell you this not because I expect you to believe me, but because I need someone else to carry the memory. If you ever find yourself near Murray, and someone points to an old trail leading into the deep forest, don't go. No matter how curious you are, no matter who dares you, turn back. Because once you step onto that moss road, it doesn't matter how fast you run, part of you never comes back. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. I kicked at the gravel on the trail just to hear the crunch under my boots and remind myself I wasn't completely alone out there. That sound was the only steady thing, the only proof I was moving forward. I'd chosen that logging trail in Nanaimo because it was supposed to be quiet, almost forgotten, and I wanted space to think, to breathe, without people staring at me or whispering behind my back. Hiking gave me a way to settle my head, but that day, nothing about the path settled me. The first thing that struck me as wrong was the way the trees seemed too evenly spaced, too carefully shaped, like they'd been lined up for a stage set instead of grown wild. Then I saw the first puppet. It was nailed to a tree just ahead, its head tilted, body slumped. It was crude wooden, painted with fading colors, joints strung tight with wire. It looked like something a child might have made for school. I slowed, tilted my head, stared at it longer than I needed to. Weird, I muttered, because saying it out loud made it smaller, less threatening, but I felt my throat tighten anyway. When I walked again, I caught it from the corner of my eye. The puppet's arm had shifted. Just a little. I told myself I'd misremembered, that I'd noticed wrong. I kept moving, determined not to turn back. The crunch of gravel under my feet matched the faint squeak of its wooden joints. My pulse hammered. A few minutes later, I stopped to sip water. I set my bottle back, shifted my pack, and froze. The puppet's head was turned now, tilted toward me. I knew it hadn't been before. A thin breeze pushed through the trees, but not enough to spin a nailed puppet's head. My stomach dropped. I started walking faster, pushing down the urge to glance back. That's when the second puppet appeared. Nailed to another tree, farther along, but this one was different. Its arms were raised, legs bent like it was mid-step. My step, the exact position I'd been in a moment. Earlier, I felt my jaw clench. I whispered, "No, no, no," like it would cancel it out, like it would wake me up from whatever trick my brain was playing. But when I lifted my foot to move again, the puppet's leg lifted too, scraping faintly against bark, even though it shouldn't have been able to. I couldn't breathe right. My chest heaved, and I kept telling myself, "Keep moving, just keep moving," and I did. Each time I took a step, the puppet shifted, not perfectly, not smoothly, but enough to mirror me. The next one mirrored me too. And the next. Soon there were half a dozen, each nailed in a sequence down the trail, each one catching a different fragment of me as though I was being broken into pieces and hung up like a gallery. I tried stopping. Dead still, heart pounding, sweat sticking to my shirt. The puppets didn't stop. They kept walking, one jointed leg at a time, deeper into the woods, moving with the rhythm of my earlier steps. I whispered, "Jesus Christ, what are you?" My voice cracked. I wanted to run, but I felt trapped in their pull. If I didn't follow, if I let them walk ahead alone, something in me told me they'd take more than just my steps with them. So I followed. Each crunch of gravel I made sounded heavier, like the trail was punishing me for keeping up. My thighs ached, but I didn't dare slow. The puppets led me around a bend where the trail narrowed, trees crowding in close. My skin crawled with the feeling of being herded. My voice shook when I whispered, "This isn't real," but my mouth tasted of copper, and I knew it was. The forest grew darker, not from time passing but because the branches knitted above me, choking out light. The puppets were harder to see, but I could hear them wood scraping, wires twanging. My knees trembled. I thought of turning back, but the trail behind looked wrong now, like it folded in on itself, shadows bending the path. I had no choice, forward or nowhere. Then I came to the clearing. Not a wide one, just a pocket of space where the ground dipped. Dozens of puppets hung from the trees here. Some nailed, some strung from wires, all facing inward toward the center. Their bodies jerked and stuttered, clumsy marionette dances, imitating movements that weren't mine anymore. My stomach flipped when I realized whose movements they were copying. People's. Whole groups of people. A child skipping, a woman carrying something heavy, a man stumbling on an injured leg. It was like watching an archive of stolen lives. I tried to step back, but the ground under me cracked. I looked down and saw wood. The clearing floor wasn't soil at all, it was planks, laid out in uneven boards. My weight made them creak. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the gap, and froze. There were voices beneath, faint, muffled cries, hundreds of them overlapping, desperate, pleading. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The puppets jerked faster, frantically now, as if excited by my discovery. Their limbs rattled so loud it drowned the voices. I screamed, "What do you want from me?" My voice shook the clearing, but the answer wasn't words, it was action. One puppet near the center leaned forward and tore itself free of the nail pinning it. It landed awkwardly, splintering at the joints, then crawled toward me, arms scratching wood. Its painted face, smeared from rain, grinned with cracks. I bolted. My legs screamed, but I forced them, crashing through the tree line, ignoring branches whipping my face. I didn't look back, not once. The crunch of gravel under my boots returned, steady, human, mine. I thought I'd escaped until the sound changed. 2 crunches for each of mine, then 3, then dozens. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw them puppets, spilling from the trees, jerking forward in unison, their heads all tilted at the same broken angle. I ran until my chest burned and the world tilted. At last, sunlight hit me. Real sunlight. I burst out onto an access road, stumbled to my knees, and vomited. When I lifted my head, the forest line stood quiet. Empty. No puppets, just trees. I dragged myself back into town, half delirious, and didn't tell anyone for days. When I finally forced the story out, people just nodded politely, faces guarded, like they'd heard something like it before. One old man at the diner leaned over and whispered, "That trail's been closed 20 years. They warned you?" I shook my head. He only said, "Don't go back." I never did. But here's the part that won't leave me alone. A week later, I unpacked my hiking bag, finally brave enough to touch it again. Inside the side pocket, I found something I hadn't packed. A puppet. Crude, small, its joints stiff, and it was carved with my face, my hair, my eyes, even the scar on my chin. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it out. I just sat on the floor, holding it, while my reflection in its painted eyes blinked a moment after mine did. And I knew, without any doubt, that my steps hadn't been my own since that trail. They've been following me ever since. I woke to it the first night I arrived, a sound so sharp it sliced straight into my sleep and left me gasping upright in bed. It wasn't an animal cry, not really. It was too jagged, too metallic, like someone had taken a wolf's howl and run it through a rusted pipe. My heart hammered so violently, I pressed my palm to my chest to steady myself. At first I thought maybe it was a factory noise drifting from town, but then it came again, long, rising, and close, much too close. The window glass trembled with the vibration. I told myself not to be ridiculous. It was just the forest. My cousin Adam had warned me earlier in the day. The woods here have voices. You'll hear things you won't like. Don't follow them. He'd grinned when he said it, but there'd been something behind his eyes that wasn't joking. I lay awake, waiting for silence. But the howling kept coming in intervals, each one setting my teeth on edge until exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast. My aunt stirred her tea without looking at me. "Old traps," she muttered. Adam kicked her under the table, and she fell silent. I pressed them, confused. "What do you mean, old traps? Like, hunting traps?" Adam smirked, like he was teasing, but his voice cracked a little. "There are rusting iron traps scattered in the woods. Hunters left them. They make noise when the wind hits them." I asked why they hadn't been collected, but he shrugged and changed the subject. My aunt avoided my eyes the rest of the meal. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, the howls came again, sharper, longer. My skin crawled every time. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on my boots, slipped outside, and followed the sound. The air was thick and damp, each step muffled in pine needles. My flashlight beam bobbed ahead of me, trembling with my pulse. The howling grew louder the deeper I went, echoing off the trees until I couldn't tell direction anymore. My stomach tightened. Then the beam hit it, a bear trap, wide jaws rusted red, sitting half buried in the soil like it had been waiting. As I watched, it shuddered. The jaws snapped shut with a clang so violent I yelped. No wind, no animal touched it, just movement by itself. Blood streaked the iron, not dry and old but fresh, wet enough to glisten. I backed up fast, nearly tripping over a root. The trap opened again with a squeal, then closed, like some hideous breathing. The howl came not from the sky, not from wolves, but from the grinding metal itself. My whole body screamed to run, but curiosity twisted in me like a hook. I swung the flashlight wider. More traps, scattered in a rough circle, some small, some massive, each one trembling, jaws snapping shut in random rhythm. The howls layered together until it sounded like a choir of tortured iron. My throat dried out. I thought of bones caught there, crushed, abandoned. A cold certainty struck me. This wasn't hunters, leaving their tools behind. These traps were placed, arranged. For what purpose, I couldn't yet understand. My mind buzzed with questions, fear slamming against them like waves. I turned to leave, but movement stopped me. On the ground beside one trap was a shoe. Small, a child's. I bolted back to the house, slamming the door behind me. My aunt was waiting in the hallway like she'd known I'd gone. She didn't scold me, didn't ask. She just whispered, "You shouldn't have seen them." Adam appeared behind her, pale as the dead. "They'll know now," he said. I demanded an explanation. My aunt refused, shaking her head over and over, but Adam pulled me into his room and closed the door. "People go missing here," he said quietly. "Kids, travelers. They say the forest keeps them. But I've seen things. The traps don't rust away. They feed. The blood is always fresh. When they open and close, that's the forest breathing through them." He swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have gone. If it howled for you, it means it's calling you in." I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was insane, but my stomach turned when I remembered the shoe. The shine of wet blood. "Why doesn't anyone report it?" I asked. He shook his head. "To who? Outsiders? The police stopped coming decades ago. People here pretend it's just wind. It's easier than admitting the truth." For 3 nights I refused to sleep. I heard the howling every time darkness fell, louder now, more insistent, almost like it was circling the house. My dreams blurred with waking. I saw flashes of teeth, felt iron closing on my legs. I couldn't bear it anymore. On the 4th night, I grabbed Adam's arm and told him we had to end it, whatever it was. He begged me not to, but he followed. Maybe he was afraid to let me go alone. We carried a hammer and a heavy crowbar. We reached the clearing, and sure enough, the traps lay waiting. The howls were deafening, so loud I thought my ears would bleed. My flashlight caught the child's shoe again. This time, it wasn't alone. A torn coat, tiny bones, a cracked skull lay scattered near the biggest trap. I gagged, bile burning my throat, but forced myself to move forward. I lifted the crowbar and slammed it into the jaws. The trap shrieked, a piercing metallic wail, sparks flying as if alive. The other traps clanged in response, snapping shut and opening like a storm of teeth. The ground vibrated beneath us. Adam screamed, "Stop!" But I couldn't. I hammered again and again until the trap twisted, warped. Then it did something I'll never forget. It bled. Not rust, not oil, thick, dark blood spilled from the iron itself, steaming on the ground. The howling turned to something worse. A chorus of voices, human voices, screaming in agony. Adam dragged me back, shouting, "We can't kill them. They're not machines. They're graves." I shook him off, horrified. "What? What are you talking about?" He sobbed, voice breaking. "Every person they've taken, they live inside the iron. Break the trap. You don't free them, you torture them more. They're part of the forest now. The truth crashed over me. That's why the blood was always fresh. That's why the voices howled. The traps weren't just tools, they were prisons, filled with the suffering of everyone who'd ever been caught. I dropped the crowbar, trembling so hard my teeth clattered. What do we do then? Just leave them? Adam nodded, eyes red, broken. It's the only way. If you fight them, they'll take you too. The forest roared with metallic cries as if mocking us. We stumbled back through the trees, every step heavy with failure. I kept hearing the voices long after we reached the house. I still hear them now, sometimes, when I close my eyes. I left Zamość the next day, swearing never to return. My aunt hugged me goodbye but wouldn't meet my gaze. Adam just muttered, "Forget it." But how could I forget? The sound follows me everywhere, a faint ringing in my ears, like distant iron grinding shut. And here's the part I've never told anyone else. The last night before I left, I woke to silence. Not relief silence like breath being held. I crept to the window, desperate to check. Out there in the tree line, I saw a glint. Not eyes, not lanterns, steel. A trap, sitting upright, jaws open wide, pointed directly toward the house. It hadn't been there before. So if you ever hear a metallic howl in the woods, don't go looking. Don't even ask questions. Because once they notice you, they'll never stop waiting. And the truth is, I don't think they're done with me yet. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. I was halfway down the trail when I first heard it. At least, I thought I heard it. Just a brush of sound, like someone dragging their breath through the pine needles overhead. I stopped, listening, the straps of my pack biting into my shoulders as my heartbeat seemed to press against my ears. Nothing, only the dry snap of a twig beneath my boot when I shifted weight. I told myself it was the wind funneling strangely through the trees. The forest in central Finland was deep and old, and I'd been walking alone for hours. I had let myself drift into that steady rhythm, where your brain drifts away, your body just carrying itself forward. That's when your senses trick you. I took another step, and the whisper slid between the branches again. This time, it wasn't wind. It was sound shaped into something disturbingly precise. It said my birth name. The one I had buried years ago. The one that still cut like broken glass whenever it surfaced in memories. Nobody in Jyväskylä could possibly know it, and I had never spoken it aloud here. Hearing it come from nowhere, from inside that thick lattice of pines, nearly buckled my knees. I forced myself to keep walking, refusing to give the forest my fear. My mind grasped at logic. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe it was my own mind echoing things I didn't want to hear. Maybe it was just some warped Finnish word in the breeze, hitting my ears the wrong way. But the sound had been too sharp, too exact. A syllable for syllable match, low and deliberate, like someone leaning close enough to make sure I understood. By the time I made camp, I had convinced myself I'd imagined it. I set up my tent just off the trail, where the trees thinned slightly, boiled water, ate quickly. The act of routine felt like armor. But once darkness closed in, my bravado thinned. The forest was not silent, it was oppressively full. Every creak of branch, every shuffle of leaves carried weight. I kept glancing into the dark as if the trees themselves were tilting closer. When it came again, I was lying in my sleeping bag with my headlamp off, trying to slow my breathing. The whisper was softer this time, not a shout or even a call. It was as though someone knelt beside the tent fabric and let the name fall directly into my ear. The zipper of my bag burned against my fingers as I gripped it, frozen. I wanted to call out, but my throat closed like it had swallowed stone. I waited for footsteps, for a shadow moving across the tent wall. Nothing came. The silence after was worse than the whisper. I knew if I stayed still, I'd unravel, so I forced myself upright, flicked the headlamp on, and unzipped the tent. The beam caught only endless pine trunks and the glitter of frost on the needles. The forest looked blank, indifferent. I turned in a slow circle, muttering out loud, "There's no one, it's just me." My voice cracked. I must have sounded pathetic, a traveler talking to empty trees like a child convincing themselves there were no monsters under the bed. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back to my pack, the headlamp propped to cast a cone of light onto the dirt. At some point near dawn, exhaustion hit me hard, and I drifted into a half-sleep full of twitching jerks and restless dreams. When I snapped awake, there were footprints pressed into the damp earth just beyond the edge of light. Not boot prints, bare feet. Long, narrow, unmistakably human. They circled my tent once and disappeared into the woods. I swore aloud, a raw sound tearing up my throat. Logic failed me. It couldn't have been an animal. It couldn't have been another hiker barefoot in the near-freezing night. My whole body wanted to collapse, but fear made me vicious. I stuffed everything back into my pack in frantic motions and got moving, not caring that I left half my breakfast uncooked and my tent poles sticking at awkward angles. The trail felt different now, the trees closer, their bark darker, as if the forest had shifted overnight. Every step felt watched. I kept spinning, scanning the trunks for movement. My ears clung to every sound, but the woods offered nothing but their usual murmurs. For hours, no whisper came. I told myself I had escaped it by leaving camp, though the footprints never left my mind. By late afternoon, my body begged for rest, but I refused. I pushed until the light began to fade, and the shadows stretched longer than I could reason with. My legs shook, my head swam with fatigue. I had no choice but to stop. I chose a clearing with ground hard as stone and sat, clutching my water bottle as if it could tether me to the real world. That night, it didn't whisper once. Instead, I woke to laughter. Low, broken laughter, the sound of someone forcing joy through a throat that didn't believe it. My stomach turned cold. It came from all around, not one direction but everywhere at once, threading through the trees, echoing without echo. Then, clear as if spoken by someone standing 2 feet away, the laughter twisted into that name again. I yelled then, my own voice shattered out of me, rough, desperate. "Stop! You don't get to call me that. You don't exist." I stood in the dark, fists trembling, rage burning hotter than fear. The sound cut off instantly. The forest fell into a dead hush, so complete that even my own gasps seemed muffled. For the first time, the silence felt like someone listening. I barely remember the rest of that night. I know I stayed awake, every nerve flayed open, waiting for it to return, but it never did. When the sun rose, the forest looked ordinary again, green, damp, alive with birdsong. I almost laughed from the absurdity, as if daylight had undone everything. Still, I packed quickly and started moving. By the third day, I stumbled into a small village. My body was shaking from exhaustion, and the first building I found was a cafe. I must have looked half mad. Mud-streaked, red-eyed, rambling in broken Finnish about voices in the forest. The woman behind the counter didn't laugh. She gave me water, then quietly asked if I had camped near the old pine trails by the lake. When I nodded, her face shifted into something solemn. She told me, hikers sometimes heard things there, voices that used names they should not know. She didn't say more, just pressed her lips thin and refused my questions. That was years ago, but I can still hear it sometimes. Not out in the woods anymore, but in the empty corners of quiet rooms, in the pause between songs when I'm wearing headphones. The whisper doesn't use the name now. It doesn't need to. It just lingers at the edge of hearing, a reminder carved into the air itself. I don't tell many people about it because they'd assume I'm exaggerating or clinging to trauma, but I know what I heard. I know it wasn't in my head, and I know, beyond any comforting logic, that the forest called me by a name I thought I had killed. Something in those pines knew me in a way it never should have. And the worst part isn't that it happened, it's that a part of me believes it's still waiting, still out there, biding its time for when I dare walk alone under those trees again. My sister was only a few steps behind me when I realized I couldn't hear her anymore. I had been walking with my parents ahead, half listening to my father talk about the village down the hill, when I turned my head to check on her. She had always lagged behind, distracted by rocks or flowers, but this time she wasn't on the path. At first I thought she'd crouched down to tie her shoes, but when I called her name, the silence that answered felt too sharp, like the trail had swallowed her voice. I told my parents, and we backtracked. I expected to see her just around the bend, maybe holding some wildflower or poking at the ground with a stick. Instead, what I saw made no sense. There, rising from the slope at the side of the path, was a staircase carved straight into the rock. It wasn't long or grand, just 10 or 12 stone steps, leading up into nothing. The last step ended flat against open air, like the rest of whatever had once been there had been erased. My sister stood at the base, staring up at it like it had called her. "Come here," my mother snapped, rushing to her. But before she could reach her, my sister put her hand on the railing carved into the stone and started climbing. Her voice floated back to us as clear as if she were walking ahead of us on the trail. "I'll just be a second," she said. She climbed, her small hands sliding along the rail, her shoes tapping against each step. I could hear her breathing, her voice, the scrape of her shoes on stone, but I couldn't see her anymore. It happened so quickly. One moment she was visible, stepping higher than our heads, the next moment she was gone, as though she'd walked into a curtain of air that shut behind her. My father lunged forward, grabbing the steps, and shouted her name. She answered immediately, her voice bright and casual, but she was nowhere in sight. "I'm right here. I'm almost at the top." But there was no top. The staircase ended abruptly, flat, with nothing above it but open slope and trees. I remember feeling a strange tug in my chest, a cold ache that spread down to my stomach. My father was climbing now, yelling for her. He reached the last step, swung his arm wildly through the air, grasping at nothing. My sister's voice called back again, laughing a little, like she thought we were playing some game. My mother clutched my arm so tightly her nails bit into my skin. "Step back," she shouted at him. "You'll fall." He stood on the final stair, hand shaking as he held the rail, swiping again at empty space. My sister's voice came from somewhere close, but wrong, like she was behind a wall of glass. "Wait for me. Don't leave," she cried. My father shouted her name again and again. His voice cracked, each cry higher than the last. He crouched, patting the air, then dropped his arm and just stood, trembling. Finally, he climbed back down, almost stumbling into my mother's arms. I could see the fear on his face in a way I'd never seen before. He was a man who didn't believe in nonsense, yet his lips trembled as he said, "She's gone." We stayed. We screamed her name into the trees, into the mist, into the rocks. She always answered. Her voice never faded. Sometimes she sounded only a few feet away. "Come on, I'm right here." Sometimes she sounded like she was further, muffled, but still close enough to be real. But no matter where we turned, she wasn't there. I ran down the slope, scratched my legs, tearing through brush, searching for her bright red jacket. Nothing. My father tried climbing the stairs again, tried leaning off the side, tried hauling rocks to throw into the air above the top step. They just sailed harmlessly over. My sister laughed once when he did that. "Don't throw stuff at me. You almost hit me." It was unbearable. Hearing her voice but not seeing her face. Hearing her breathe. Hearing the way she shuffled her feet, always just out of reach. My mother started sobbing, clutching the stone railing like it might explain itself. I couldn't stop staring at those steps. They looked old, worn smooth, but they ended in blank air, like a path that had been cut short. Who built them? Why were they there? Time bled strangely after that. We stayed on that slope for hours, maybe longer, shouting, pleading, listening. My sister never stopped calling back. She kept repeating the same things, "I'm coming, wait!" But she never arrived. My father finally tried walking away, thinking maybe if we left the trail, she would follow. But as soon as he turned, her voice grew panicked. "Don't go, don't leave me here," she cried then, real sobs that shredded through the trees. My father froze, shoulders slumping. We couldn't leave her, even if we couldn't see her. Night fell. The forest grew darker, and the air turned cold. Her voice didn't change with the night. It stayed clear, sometimes close, sometimes drifting. My mother sat on the ground, rocking, her lips moving in silent prayers. My father paced, muttering to himself. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trembling. The steps loomed, silent, waiting. Eventually, my father said, "One of us has to go up." His voice was hoarse, empty of anything but exhaustion. He placed his foot on the first step. My mother shrieked, grabbed his shirt, begged him not to. He pried her hands off gently, looked at me with a hollow stare, and started climbing. I held my breath as he ascended. Step after step, higher and higher, until he reached the last one. He extended his arm, slowly, cautiously, into the air above. He held it there, fingers splayed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he whispered, "I feel her. I swear to you." He said it. His face lit with the faintest hope. He leaned forward, reaching farther. Then his body jerked violently, like something had pulled him. His foot slipped off the edge. My mother screamed. He pitched forward into the parity. Empty space. I expected him to crash down the slope, bones breaking against rock, but he didn't fall. He vanished. No sound, no thud, nothing. He was simply gone. My mother collapsed, clutching her chest. I couldn't breathe. I scrambled to the steps, stared at the final stair. I shouted for him, for her, for anyone. Their voices came back together now. My sister giggling, my father calling calmly, reassuring us. "It's all right, we're fine. Just come up." I backed away, shaking my head. My mother didn't move. She kept staring at the steps like they'd grown taller, like they were towering above her. She whispered his name over and over. The night grew colder. I begged her to leave with me, but she wouldn't. She crawled to the base of the steps, pressed her forehead against the stone, and whispered to them like they could hear her. I didn't sleep. I just sat, listening to the two voices calling from nowhere. When morning came, my mother was gone. No sound of struggle, no sign of departure. I woke from a daze, and she simply wasn't beside me anymore. The voices called together, now 3 of them, cheerful, close. I stumbled through the forest, screaming, clawing at the trees until my throat tore. People from the village found me later, half delirious, bloodied from thorns. They carried me back, and I tried to explain. No one believed me. They said, my family must have gotten lost, must have fallen, must have gone somewhere else, but I hear them still. Even now, years later, if I close my eyes, I can hear their voices calling, laughing, beckoning. I never went back to those steps, though I know where they are. Sometimes, at night, I dream of climbing them, and in my dream, I do. I take one step, then another. Their voices grow louder, warmer, full of love. They say my name, again and again, until I'm almost there. And when I reach the last step, I wake up, gasping, with tears on my face. I tell you this because I can't carry it alone anymore. It was real. The staircase is real. And it doesn't lead nowhere. It leads to something that takes, that keeps, that never lets go. And I know one day, against every promise I've ever made to myself, I'll climb it too. I remember the exact moment it all began, the second I realized something wasn't right. We were halfway through the hike, the teacher counting heads as we moved along the forest path outside Plovdiv. It was supposed to be an easy day trip, just a school outing with friends, nothing more dangerous than slipping in the mud. But when I glanced back and saw Petar, the quiet boy from my class, stepping off the trail toward the trees, I didn't think much of it. He was always wandering, always drifting to the edges, like he wanted to escape the rest of us. I figured he'd circle back in a few minutes. Only he didn't. "Hey, did anyone see where Petar went?" I asked, slowing down. A couple of my friends shrugged. The teacher, distracted trying to keep 20 of us from scattering, didn't notice. For a minute I debated saying more, but then I spotted a strip of red fabric tied to a branch. I thought it was some kind of trail marker, something left by the guides who set up these routes. A second ribbon hung farther in, bright against the bark, and between them, faint movement, Petar's jacket disappearing deeper into the trees. "Come on," my friend Nico said, pulling at my arm. "We're losing the group." "No, look," I said, pointing. "That's Petar. He went that way." Nico squinted. "You sure?" Another of our classmates, Maria, had overheard. "We can't just leave him. He'll get lost." It didn't take long for 5 or 6 of us to peel away from the main group. We didn't call to the teacher, didn't shout after the others. It felt like Petar wasn't far, like we'd catch him in minutes. Besides, those ribbons gave the impression of safety. They were bright, deliberate, like someone had left them to show the way. We followed them deeper, weaving between trees. Every few steps another red strip fluttered ahead, always just far enough to keep us moving forward. Maria kept calling Petar's name, her voice bouncing. Strangely in the woods. I swear I heard someone answer once, a low sound, almost like his voice, but when I stopped to listen, it was gone. The trail narrowed until I realized it wasn't a trail at all, just earth trampled by feet that weren't ours. The ground was uneven, roots clutching at our shoes. Still, we pressed on, the red flashes drawing us further. "He's really far now," Nico muttered, breathless. Something in me started to itch. The ribbons were too clean, too fresh, as if they'd just been tied minutes ago. But there were too many of them for someone to keep running ahead. I felt the unease twisting in my stomach, yet I didn't stop. None of us did. "Wait," Maria suddenly said, pointing. The trees thinned, opening into a clearing where the land sloped sharply. At the edge, I saw a cliff, the kind that dropped into nothing but jagged stone below. The red ribbons continued, tied along branches right up to the brink. Petar was nowhere. We froze. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Even the birds had gone quiet. My throat tightened. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered. Nico kicked at the dirt. "Where the hell is he?" Maria stepped forward, peering over the edge. Her gasp snapped my nerves. I rushed to her side, heart hammering. Below us, sheer rock walls fell away, the drop dizzying. Nothing moved, no sign of anyone climbing down. If Petar had come this way, he couldn't have gone farther. Unless, maybe he turned back, Nico suggested, but his voice shook. We all turned in unison to look behind us. The trail we had taken, the one dotted with bright red ribbons, was gone. The trees stood bare, no fabric fluttering, no path leading home. My knees weakened as if the ground had shifted beneath me. "That's impossible," Maria said, clutching her arms tight. "I swear they were there. You all saw them too." We nodded, too scared to speak. I wanted to believe we'd simply lost our way, that the ribbons were proofless, still out there if we looked hard enough. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. The forest had changed. It was as if we had stepped into a place that obeyed different rules. Panic rippled through the group. 2 of the boys started arguing, one insisting we go left, the other saying we'd come from the right. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to think rationally. "We just have to retrace our steps," I said, though my voice cracked. We stumbled back into the trees, every direction blending into the same dark confusion. We searched desperately for even one scrap of ribbon, one clue, But there was nothing. And then, faintly, we heard footsteps. They came from ahead, soft but deliberate, like someone walking just out of sight. Maria's face lit up. "It's him!" she cried, and she darted forward before any of us could stop her. "Maria, wait!" I shouted. We ran after her, branches slapping our arms, the ground snagging our shoes. Her figure flickered between trees, always just beyond reach. Then suddenly she wasn't moving anymore. She stood frozen in front of us, staring straight ahead with her mouth open. I skidded to a stop beside her. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She just pointed. A ribbon dangled from a branch, red, bright, unmistakable. And behind it, another, and another, curving through the forest in a line that looked far too perfect. Nico grabbed my shoulder. "We're not doing this again. It's a trick." But Maria was already stepping toward them. "It has to lead somewhere. Maybe it's the way out." My head spun. Every instinct screamed that we shouldn't follow, that this was leading us deeper into something wrong. But at the same time, what choice did we have? We were lost. We needed direction. So we followed again. The ribbons led us downhill, the air colder, the trees denser. Shadows tangled together, swallowing the path behind us until I couldn't see where we'd come from. My chest ached with every breath. Finally, the ribbons stopped. The last one hung over a clearing where the ground sank into a shallow pit. In the center lay something dark and crumpled. I forced my legs forward, dread weighing each step. It was a jacket, Petar's jacket. Maria screamed. The others cursed, stumbling back. I reached down, hands trembling, and lifted the fabric. It was torn, filthy, and stiff, with something that looked like dried mud or dried blood. "He has to be close," I said, my voice hollow. But inside, I already knew he wasn't. We heard footsteps again, circling us now, coming from everywhere at once. No figure appeared, no voice spoke, just the sound of someone or something moving around the edges of the clearing. We huddled together, terrified, whispering frantic plans that made no sense. Then, one by one, the ribbons we had followed began to vanish. Not fall, not blow away, vanish. As if the forest swallowed them. The branches that had held them stood bare, mocking us. Nico grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "We have to run, now!" So we did. We didn't care about direction anymore. We ran until our lungs burned, until sweat stung our eyes. At some point we burst into another clearing where the ground sloped upward, and climbing that hill, we finally stumbled back onto the real trail. The teacher's voice rang out, furious and frightened, demanding to know where we had been. Relief hit so hard I almost collapsed. Around us, the other students gawked. To them, we had been gone less than an hour, but to me, it felt like a lifetime. The teacher never believed our story. She scolded us, accused us of wandering off for fun, of scaring everyone on purpose. But the fear in Maria's eyes, the trembling in Nico's hands, those were real. And the jacket we carried back, Petar's jacket, was proof enough for me. Only when we showed it to the teacher, it was clean. No dirt, no rips, no stains. Just an ordinary jacket. And worse, Petar was never found. Search teams combed the area for days, helicopters droning overhead, dogs barking in the brush. Nothing. He had vanished completely, as if the forest had claimed him. For weeks afterward, I dreamed of those ribbons, red against the green, pulling me forward. Sometimes I'd wake certain I could hear footsteps outside my window. Sometimes I'd imagine a flash of color at the edge of the schoolyard, like someone marking a path only I could see. Years have passed, but I can still feel that same dread when I think about it. I've never gone hiking again. I can't even walk near the woods without remembering how the forest changed around us, how it played with us. And I will never forget the moment we turned back and saw the ribbons were gone. That's the part that still haunts me most, the realization that they were never markers at all. They weren't leading us to safety. They were leading us exactly where we weren't supposed to be. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't turned back in time. If we had followed those ribbons all the way to the end, would we have vanished too? Or did the forest only want one of us? Because sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I still hear footsteps. And they always stop just before I turn around. I had barely zipped my tent when I noticed the first thing out of place. My boots, which I'd left neatly by the flap, were turned in opposite directions, one pointing toward the woods, the other toward the river below. It seemed small, almost laughably insignificant. I told myself I must have kicked them as I crawled inside, even though I knew I hadn't. But that's how it started, and that was the first time I felt that heavy, pressing awareness that someone or something was watching me out there in the quiet. The trail I had chosen was deep in Charlevoix, a rugged area of Quebec that seemed perfect for a solitary hike before classes resumed. I was 21, armed with a battered journal and a cheap camera, and thought of myself as tougher than I really was. The woods felt like a challenge, a place where I could prove to myself that I was capable of being alone. That night, though, I lay awake, with my boots in the wrong place, and my nerves tingling like static under my skin. The next morning, I unzipped my tent, trying to laugh it off. But then I saw the rest of the camp. My cooking pot, which I had scrubbed and left on a flat rock, was balanced precariously on top of my backpack. My food bag was hanging from a low branch, tied in a knot I didn't remember making. My journal, which I always kept sealed in a dry pouch, was lying open on the ground as if someone had been reading it. The pages fluttered slightly in the breeze, and my handwriting stared back at me. My first thought was that some other hiker had wandered through while I was asleep. But I hadn't heard footsteps, no voices, nothing. The trail wasn't popular, especially not in the stretch I'd chosen. I called out, my voice echoing between the trees. "Hello? Anyone there?" The silence that followed felt thick, unnatural. I picked everything up, shoved it back into place, and told myself it was nothing. That day I pushed harder down the trail than I'd planned, trying to burn the unease out of my body. The forest closed around me, dense evergreens that felt endless. At breaks, I scribbled in my journal, trying to pin down my thoughts before they slipped into paranoia. I wrote, "Something strange last night. Camp rearranged. Maybe wind, maybe an animal. Don't panic." Writing it down made it feel more manageable, like I was still in control. By the time I set up camp again that evening, the rational side of me was back in charge. I placed my gear in neat, deliberate positions, boots together by the tent flap, a food bag sealed, journal zipped inside my pack. I even whispered to myself, half mocking, half reassuring, "Now we'll see if it happens again." It did. At 3 in the morning, I woke with the sudden, sharp certainty that something had changed. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and froze. My boots were gone. The spot by the flap was empty, the damp ground bare. I scrambled out of the tent, sweeping the beam across the clearing. They were sitting 5 feet away, perfectly aligned side by side, toes pointing directly toward the woods. My hands shook as I picked them up. No tracks, no rustle of leaves, no sign anyone had been there. I shoved the boots back inside, zipped everything tight, and sat awake until dawn, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. That morning, exhaustion clung to me like a weight. I ate dry granola, packed quickly, and told myself I'd cut the trip short. Better to head back than spiral into fear. But when I reached for my journal, it was open again, lying on the ground outside my pack. My handwriting filled the page in long, frantic lines I didn't remember writing. The words made my skin crawl. He's watching. He moves when you don't look. He wants you to follow. The handwriting was mine. Every letter curved, the way I always curved them. But I hadn't written it. I swore I hadn't. I stuffed the journal deep in my bag, refusing to look at it again. The rest of that day passed in a blur of panic. Every sound in the trees made me whip around. Once, I swore I saw movement, a figure between the trunks. But when I blinked, there was only bark and shadow. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't eat. I just walked, faster and faster, until the light began to die. When I finally pitched my tent, I left no order to my gear. I scattered everything randomly, as though that might break the pattern. Boots tossed one way, bag another, journal buried deep. I collapsed inside and tried to sleep, though my body was too tense, my ears straining for any sound. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me under. I woke at dawn, stiff and cold. I forced myself to open the flap and look. Every single item had been moved. My boots, my pack, my cooking gear, even my tent stakes lined up in a perfect circle around the camp, each item pointing inward, toward where I had been sleeping. I can't describe the way my stomach turned. It was more than fear. It was the realization that something had been inches away from me, arranging things with purpose. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't animals. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to sprint down the trail until my legs gave out. But my bag was heavy, and panic felt like molasses in my veins. I forced myself to pack, every second my eyes darting into the trees. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I just moved. At noon, I stopped for the first time in hours, legs trembling. I pulled out the journal, needing to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. The last page had new words scrawled across it, words I hadn't written. Turn back, not safe. My throat went dry. The letters weren't as neat as mine, but they were close enough to be unsettling. The ink was fresh. I dropped the journal like it had burned me. By now, I had no sense of distance. The trail blurred, each tree looking like the last. I no longer trusted my compass. The needle seemed to twitch strangely, refusing to settle. At times I thought I heard footsteps behind me, matching mine but always half a beat late. When I spun around, there was nothing. That night, I couldn't bring myself to pitch the tent. I sat against a tree, clutching my flashlight, and swore I'd keep watch until daylight. Hours crawled by. My eyelids sagged. Just when I thought I'd dozed, I heard something soft, deliberate movement in the leaves, circling me. I snapped the light on. Nothing. But when I turned back to my pack, the journal was lying open on top. The page read, "Almost there. I don't remember standing. I don't remember making the decision." But suddenly I was walking, shoving branches out of my way, not following the trail anymore, just moving through the woods as if pulled. My legs didn't feel like mine. My chest ached with terror, yet my body kept going, deeper and deeper until the trees thinned and I came to a clearing. In the center was a pile of stones, crudely stacked, forming something like a cairn. My boots carried me closer, though every nerve screamed at me to stop. At the base of the stones was my journal, open to a fresh page. The words scrawled there froze my blood. Lie down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the book and run until the forest spat me out. But my knees buckled, and I sank to the ground. It was as if the earth itself held me there, heavy and unrelenting. I remember pressing my palms into the dirt, nails clawing, whispering, "No, no, no." The last thing I saw was the journal page turning on its own, as though caught by invisible fingers. The words filled themselves in, one after another, steady and deliberate. "He is here." And then nothing. That's where the entries stop. You're staring at me, wondering how I know this if I was the one who vanished. But that's the part no one can explain. Years later, a group of hikers found my bag near that same clearing, my journal inside. The pages told the story I've just told you, word for word. My handwriting filled the book until the very end, when the lines twisted into something darker, jagged strokes that didn't look like mine at all. I was never found. Not my body, not a trace beyond that bag. And yet the story exists, written down as if I had lived long enough to tell it. And maybe, in some way, I did. It started as a stupid idea from our group chat, one of those late-night dares that sound brilliant after too much boredom and caffeine. "Let's stream something real this Halloween," Kyle said. Something creepy but not fake. We were all seniors stuck in lockdown, and Dry Creek felt like the loneliest place on earth. The town was barely a dot in northern Arkansas, surrounded by fields and shut-down churches. The old street, Aurelia's church, had burned down in 1969, taking with it a pastor and 2 parishioners, and locals still called it cursed. The bell tower, half collapsed, stood like a spine of rusted bones. Everyone said the bell hadn't rung since the fire. That made it perfect for our Halloween livestream. We packed light, just our phones, a flashlight, and a GoPro Kyle strapped to his chest. I remember my mom shouting from the porch, "Don't be stupid," as we left. I laughed, pretending not to feel that pinch of unease behind my ribs. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we parked the truck by the edge of the gravel road. The night was silent enough that the sound of our doors closing felt too loud. There were 4 of us, me, Kyle, his girlfriend Hannah, and my cousin Brent. We started the stream with nervous laughs, the live chat filling fast. People typed things like, "Turn back, and you'll get arrested," but that only made us laugh harder. We were craving something to break the monotony of quarantine life. The church was just a silhouette against the field, its wooden beams jutting like broken ribs. My flashlight beam cut through the grass and caught the charred sign, half the letters gone, reading only "Street." Or, inside, the smell was strange, earthy, and faintly chemical, like something soaked into the wood long ago. The floor creaked under our shoes, and every sound bounced too loud in the hollow space. Kyle kept his camera on himself, narrating for the stream. "All right, folks, here we are in the legendary Street Aurelia's, home of the cursed bell tower," when suddenly Hannah grabbed his sleeve and whispered, "Did you hear that?" It was faint, a shuffle, like a foot dragging somewhere near the back of the room. My pulse kicked, but I told myself it was probably a raccoon. Brent laughed it off, kicking at a pile of debris, but Kyle pointed the light toward the sound. "Just dust, nothing else." The chat exploded, though people commenting, "There's someone behind you. I saw a face. Don't go up the tower." That was the thing about live streams, you never knew if someone was messing with you. But when Hannah's hand started trembling in the light, I knew she wasn't pretending. We moved toward the staircase leading up to the bell tower. Half the steps were burned through, the wood sagging under Kyle's weight. I told him it was a bad idea, but he grinned. "Come on, man. One quick shot of the bell, and we're viral." He started climbing. I followed because the thought of staying down there alone made my stomach twist. The air changed as we went up, drier, colder. My flashlight flickered, and I could hear something faint above us, a metallic creak. "That's just the wind," Brent called from below. But there wasn't any wind. The bell was massive, coated in soot and rust, suspended by a cracked wooden beam. I ran my light over it and saw the date engraved, 1899. The clapper was missing. That meant it couldn't ring, at least not naturally. Hannah refused to come closer. She stayed at the bottom of the steps, whispering to the camera that something didn't feel right. "Look at this," Kyle said, touching the side of the bell. It was warm. I mean actually warm, like something living. I touched it too, and a vibration traveled through my fingertips, not strong but steady, like a heartbeat buried in metal. That was when my phone buzzed. The chat was going insane. Hundreds of people typing the same message, "It's behind." I turned, the beam jerking across black walls and empty air. Kyle laughed nervously. "Okay, whoever's trolling us, good job." But the sound came again, the same dragging step, this time from the landing below. Hannah screamed, "Kyle, come down! There's someone!" Her voice cut off into static as my screen froze. The stream lagged, showing only a smear of color and our reflections warped by compression. We rushed down the steps. My shoulder hit the wall, sending pain down my arm. Hannah was gone. Brent was pointing toward the door. She ran outside. We bolted through the broken archway into the field. My flashlight caught her silhouette 20 yards ahead, running toward the truck. I started after her, but the light hit something else, something swinging. The rope from the bell tower window hung loose now, frayed and moving slightly, though the air was still dead calm. Then the sound came soft at first, then deep, vibrating through the ground, the bell. I swear to God, Ishfaq, that bell rang. It was a deep, slow toll that shook my ribs. The kind of sound that doesn't just fill your ears, it crawls into your chest. Kyle's face drained of color. "That's not possible," he whispered. "There's no clapper." But it kept ringing, slower and slower, like something winding down after decades of silence. We ran to the truck. Hannah was inside, crying, clutching her phone. "The stream's gone," she said. It ended right before the bell started. Brent was fumbling with the keys, but the engine wouldn't start. The dashboard flickered, dead. I looked back at the church. There was a glow now, not fire, not light, more like heat waves, rising from asphalt, distorting everything behind it. And then I saw movement near the door. It was a man, or maybe just the outline of one standing still, looking up toward the bell tower. His clothes were old-fashioned, the kind I'd seen in that old photo of the 1,969 fire victims. I couldn't see his face. He didn't move, didn't turn. He just raised one arm and pointed toward the bell. My voice cracked when I said, "Do you see that?" Brent didn't answer. He was hitting the steering wheel. Kyle lifted his phone to record, but the screen stayed black. Hannah sobbed, whispering, "Let's go, please." I wanted to say something brave, something like, "It's just in our heads," but my throat wouldn't work. Then the bell tolled again, louder, and all the glass in the truck vibrated. The glow around the church flickered out like a switch had been flipped. Everything went silent. The man was gone. The bell stopped. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the engine finally roared to life, and Brent hit the gas so hard the tires screamed. We didn't speak the whole way home. When we reached town, the live stream was still listed on Kyle's channel, but when we played it back, there was nothing. Just black screen, faint static, and that single, impossible toll of the bell at the end. The next day, we agreed not to talk about it. Hannah deleted the footage from her phone. Brent said it was some kind of mass panic, that maybe the sound came from a nearby farm. Kyle didn't say much at all. He just looked sick. A week later, his mom called me. He hadn't come out of his room in 2 days. When I went over, he was sitting on his bed, staring at his phone. He showed me the screen. It was the stream, but this time it had a thumbnail, a still frame of the bell tower lit from within. "It wasn't there before," he whispered. "It changed overnight. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a single photo, me, standing beside the bell, hand pressed against the metal. My phone had been off when that moment happened. I hadn't taken any photos. I didn't reply. I just sat there, staring until the battery died." By the end of that week, Kyle left town to stay with relatives in Missouri. Hannah blocked everyone and deleted her social media. Brent stopped answering calls. It felt like the whole thing had been carved out of reality, piece by piece, leaving only that one memory in my head. I tried to tell myself it was just fear, that maybe the bell had fallen or the heat from the metal caused a hallucination, but I couldn't explain the sound or the fact that it was heard across Dry Creek. Local Facebook pages filled with posts that night. People saying they heard the church bell for the first time in 50 years. Months passed. I finished high school online, tried to forget. But sometimes, around midnight, my phone would flicker with a faint vibration, not the usual notification buzz, but the same pulse I'd felt through the metal that night. Once, I swear I heard a dull echo, like the fading ring of a bell miles away. I kept telling myself I imagined it, until the anniversary of the fire, October 31st, exactly 1 year later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my window just to breathe, and I heard it again. One single, hollow toll. I checked the time. Midnight. My stomach turned cold. I knew it wasn't possible, but I drove out to the old church alone. The field looked different, flatter, emptier. When I reached where the church had stood, there was nothing left but a stone foundation and weeds. But the air had that same dry taste, like burned wood. I shined my flashlight across the ground and froze. There were 4 fresh sets of footprints, leading up to where the tower used to be ours, mine among them. I don't remember kneeling, but I must have, because when I looked down, my hand was pressed against the soil. It was warm again. I stood quickly, backing toward the truck. Then, from behind me, I heard that faint metallic creak, the same one from the stairs that night. I turned, and there was nothing but grass. Yet the sound continued, rhythmic, like a rope under strain. I wanted to leave, but part of me felt pulled, like the earth itself was humming. I forced myself back into the truck and drove until I saw streetlights again. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the field was just dark. No tower, no glow. But I could still feel the vibration under my skin. I deleted my social media after that. Kyle never came back to Dry Creek. Last I heard, he stopped talking altogether. Hannah moved to Little Rock and joined some church group. Brent joined the army and refuses to discuss that night. Every Halloween since then, I stay inside with headphones on, music turned up loud. Because no matter how much I drown it out, at exactly midnight, I feel it again, the faint, steady tremor beneath my palms, like something waiting to be rung. And the part that still makes me question everything? 2 weeks ago, the county finally bulldozed what remained of Street Aurelia's site. The report said they found the bell buried under 6 feet of soil, the beam completely rotted, the clapper rusted to dust. The workers logged one strange note at the bottom of their report. Bell rang once during excavation, cause undetermined. It started with a sound I thought was harmless, a soft, 2-note whistle that rose and fell like someone calling a dog. I was halfway up the ridge trail near Middlesboro, taking my usual hike before dusk. The mountains out here always made noise, wind through the pines, distant creek water, the occasional coyote. But that whistle wasn't wind, it was deliberate, too clean, too human. It stopped the moment I turned around, leaving the woods behind me silent in a way that made my stomach tighten. I waited, listening hard, telling myself it was probably another hiker. But there was no one else on that trail, not that late in October. The next day, it came back. I was sitting outside my small cabin, eating from a tin bowl, when I heard it again, those same 2 notes, floating from somewhere beyond the ridge. I froze mid-bite. It was faint but unmistakable. I even checked my phone, thinking maybe it came from a notification tone, but I'd heard that whistle once before, years ago, when my cousin Daniel went missing up near Pine Mountain. Search parties combed those woods for weeks, and the only clue they found was a radio left behind in his pack. It was still recording, looping back static and a single sound, that same rising and falling whistle. I hadn't thought about Daniel in years, but that night, as I lay in bed, the sound came back again, closer this time. I stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. The forest stretched black in every direction. I called out, half angry, half scared, "Who's out there?" No reply. Just that slow, steady whistle, answered after a few seconds by the creak of something moving downhill. I held my breath, then silence again. I stayed outside until my toes went numb, scanning the tree line for any sign of a flashlight or movement. Nothing. The woods have a way of swallowing sound, but that whistle it carried. By the third day, I couldn't shake it. Even at work at the county supply depot, I kept thinking I heard faint whistling between the hum of the generators. My coworker, Tom, noticed. "You good, Nate? You look like you ain't slept." I told him what was happening, trying to make it sound casual, even funny. He stopped smiling halfway through. "Don't joke about that, man," he said quietly. "You know what they say about that whistle. That's the one folks heard before the group went missing in '79. My uncle was part of that search." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh. He didn't. He just shook his head and walked off, muttering something about bad luck traveling on sound. That night, I decided to test it. I brought my old recorder, the kind journalists use, and hiked halfway up the ridge before sunset. I placed it on a tree stump, hit record, and left it running while I made camp nearby. My plan was simple. If I heard the whistle again, I'd have proof. The air got colder as the light drained away. Around midnight, just when I started to think nothing would happen, I heard it again. Clear, confident, like someone only a few yards away. I grabbed my flashlight, aimed it toward the trees, and shouted, "You think this is funny? Show yourself." The whistle stopped instantly. Then a voice, not a word, just the rough sound of breathing drifted from the dark. I ran toward it without thinking, sweeping the light between trunks. I thought I saw movement, something gray slipping behind a fallen tree, but when I got there, nothing. Just the faint smell of smoke, like someone had doused a campfire minutes earlier. My flashlight flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. I turned to run back to camp and almost tripped over the recorder, lying in the dirt where I hadn't left it. It was still running, red light blinking. I played back a few seconds, my own voice yelling, then silence, then, faintly, the whistle. Over and over, in perfect rhythm, like it was circling the mic. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I packed up fast and went straight to the sheriff's office. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I told them someone might be messing with hikers near the ridge. Sheriff Weller just looked at me like I'd handed him a ghost story. "Son," he said, "you know how many times we've heard about that whistle? Every time someone goes missing, people start hearing it again. It's superstition. The hills echo strange." I left angry. Not because he dismissed me, but because part of me wanted him to be right. That night, I replayed the tape again, this time through my computer with headphones. And that's when I heard it clearly. Behind the whistling, buried under the noise, there was something else. My own name. It came as a whisper, drawn out between the two-note patterns. "Nate." Just once. I pulled off the headphones, shaking. My hands were sweating, my throat dry. I played it again, rewinding a few seconds. The whisper was gone. Rewind again, still gone. Like it erased itself the moment I noticed. I turned off the lights, unplugged the computer, and went outside to clear my head. The sky was pale with moonlight, the ridge a jagged shadow. And there it was again, that same whistle, only this time, from my backyard. I spun toward the tree line, every nerve in my body screaming to run, but I couldn't move. The sound was close, too close, like someone standing 10 feet away. I shouted Daniel's name before I could stop myself. The whistle stopped. The silence that followed felt alive, pulsing. Then, a single voice, low and flat, came out of the dark. "You came back." I turned and ran straight into the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I locked everything, every bolt, every chain, then sat with my back against the door for what felt like hours, gripping a kitchen knife and listening for any sign of movement. Nothing followed. When morning came, I found boot prints in the mud outside. They led halfway down the slope, then vanished near the old creek bed. I didn't own boots that size. They were too wide, too heavy, like work boots from the 70s, the kind my uncle used to wear. I called Tom again, told him I was done trying to make sense of it. He came over that evening with his cousin, an old park ranger named Ed. Ed listened to my story without interrupting, then asked to hear the tape. When it finished, he didn't say a word for a long time. Then he told us about a search he'd led years ago for 3 missing miners. "We never found their bodies," he said, "but we found their radio, and that same damn whistle was on it, over and over. Never figured where it came from. Sounded like it moved when we played it in the woods." Tom suggested we go up there together that night, Halloween, just to prove it was all some echo trick. I didn't want to, but I also didn't want to keep living scared. We brought flashlights, my recorder, and an old hand radio that still picked up emergency frequencies. Around 9, we reached the ridge. Everything looked normal: trees, rocks, a thin fog creeping through the underbrush. We sat on a fallen log and waited. 10 minutes, 20. Then, right as I started to say it was pointless, the whistle came again, faint but deliberate. We all heard it. Ed raised the radio to his ear. The whistle was coming through the frequency too, perfectly synced with the one outside. My pulse shot up. "That's impossible," I said. Ed didn't answer. He just turned the volume higher. Between the whistling, a voice crackled through the static, grainy, male, older. "This is Team 4. We found the shaft. Repeat, we found the shaft." I looked at Tom. He shook his head, eyes wide. "That's the old miner's last transmission," he whispered. "The one from 79. The radio screeched suddenly, loud enough to make us all flinch. Then silence. Total silence. Not even insects. Then, as if cued by the stillness, another sound drifted through the trees, boots crunching slowly on leaves. Coming closer. We aimed our flashlights toward the sound, but the beams seemed swallowed by the fog. The steps stopped just beyond the light's edge. Then the whistle came again, impossibly close, right behind us this time. I spun around, light shaking in my hand, and caught a glimpse of something pale between the trees, a figure standing still, head tilted slightly, lips pursed mid-whistle. The light caught a metallic glint near its chest, a rusted miner's tag swinging from a chain. Then the batteries died. Darkness. I heard Tom yell, Ed curse, and then everything erupted in chaos, the radio screeching, footsteps running, my own breathing turning ragged. I stumbled downhill until my knees hit rocks. When I woke, dawn was breaking. The radio lay beside me, cracked. Tom was there too, sitting against a tree, pale as chalk. Ed was gone. We searched for him all morning, calling his name until our voices cracked. No sign. The sheriff's department found us that afternoon and escorted us down. I told them everything, even played the last part of the recording from my pocket device. It captured our voices, the footsteps, the scream, and then, faintly, the whistle fading into nothing. They wrote it off as panic, said Ed must have gotten lost in the fog. But I know what I heard. A week later, they found Ed's radio, half buried near the old mine shaft, rusted shut. The search was called off after that. Tom moved to Tennessee, said he couldn't sleep right with the sound of wind anymore. I stayed though, maybe out of guilt. Maybe because leaving would mean accepting it was all real. I haven't gone back up the ridge since. But sometimes, when the air is still, I'll hear that whistle again, faint from the direction of the woods, always those same 2 notes. Last night, I dug out the recorder again. It still works, though the battery's weak. I played the last file one more time, the one I'd never listened to all the way through. At the end, after the static fades, there's a voice, low and broken, but clear enough to recognize. It says my name again. Then, softly, you found the shaft. I dropped the recorder. It hit the floor and kept playing, but the voice didn't stop. It kept whispering the same sentence, looping endlessly until I pulled the batteries out. I haven't told anyone this part yet, but I think I'll tell you because you'll understand. This morning, when I stepped outside, there were new boot prints leading away from my porch. The same pattern as before, wide, heavy, from an older make. They stopped halfway down the trail, right where the forest begins. And from somewhere deep in those trees, just before I came back inside, I heard that whistle again. Only this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt recognition, like something waiting for me had finally remembered my name. I was halfway through my Halloween night shift at the radio station when the red light on the switchboard started blinking. It was 11:47 p.m. The kind of hour when the regulars had all gone to bed and only the lonely or the desperate still called. I'd just finished reading the weather update and was reaching for my coffee when I saw the line labeled "Call in, line 3, flash twice, then hold steady." I hit the button and said, "WVBR, you're on the air." What came back wasn't the usual prank or late-night song request. It was a shaky voice, a young male, whispering, "Please, I think someone's in my house." At first, I thought it was another Halloween stunt. We'd been getting weird calls all night, kids pretending to summon ghosts, drunks quoting horror movies, but something about this boy's voice stopped me. He sounded terrified, breath catching between words. I asked his name. He said, "Tyler." I asked where he was calling from. There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear a faint creak, like floorboards shifting under weight. Then he said, "Mount Hope, out on Ridge Road. My dad's at work. I'm home alone." His words came fast, jumbled, like he was talking while trying not to breathe too loud. I felt my gut tighten. "Okay, Tyler," I said, leaning closer to the mic even though it didn't matter. "You said someone's in your house. Are you sure?" I heard the door open. Back door. I locked it. I swear I locked it, but it opened again. I could hear the tremor in his whisper, the kind that only comes from real fear. "They're walking around." Behind him, the static hissed. Then I caught something faint, a click, then the creak of a hinge. My finger froze above the mute button. I asked, "Are you safe right now? Can you get to a phone line in your room? A window?" He said, "I'm in my dad's office. The line's here. I can't move. They'll hear me." His breathing was fast, shallow. "They're in the hallway now." Every hair on my arm stood up. I gestured to Jerry, the station's night security guy, through the glass wall. He noticed my face and came in. I muted the line and told him quietly, "Kid says there's someone breaking into his house in Mount Hope. Call the police." He nodded and went straight for the desk phone. When I unmuted, I told Tyler to stay calm, to whisper if he had to, and that help was on the way. He didn't answer right away. I heard faint footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing just outside his door, then a sound like metal dragging against wood. He whimpered. "He's trying the handle." "Tyler, listen to me," I said quickly. "Is there something heavy you can put in front of the door? A chair? A desk?" "No, he'll hear me," the voice cracked. "Please don't hang up." "I won't," I said. "I promise. You're not alone." For a few seconds, the line went dead quiet except for static. Then I heard the door creak open, and Tyler's voice cut off into a muffled gasp. There was a scraping noise, maybe the phone being knocked over, then a faint shuffle and a thud. After that, nothing. Just the hiss of an open line. I sat there frozen, the kind of cold that comes from the inside out. Jerry came back in, said, "Police are on their way. You got an address?" I replayed the conversation in my head, every word. Ridge Road, Mount Hope, My own chest tightened. Mount Hope. That wasn't just anywhere. That was my hometown. And Ridge Road, I hadn't thought about it in years, but that was where my father's old house stood, the one that had been abandoned since the fire in '72. I told Jerry to keep the line open for the cops, then I grabbed my jacket and keys. He tried to stop me, said, "Man, let them handle it," but I couldn't. Something in that boy's voice, something familiar, wouldn't let me sit still. It took me 20 minutes to reach Mount Hope. The roads were empty, the kind of Appalachian dark that swallows headlights whole. My hands gripped the steering wheel until they ached. I turned onto Ridge Road. Every curve burned into muscle memory. As I got closer, I saw flashing red and blue lights ahead. The police had already arrived. When I pulled up, 2 cruisers were parked in front of the old house. The windows were boarded, the porch sagged, and ivy had taken over half the siding. I hadn't seen it in almost 15 years, not since my father died inside. One of the officers, a stocky man with a flashlight, waved me back. "You can't be here, sir." "I'm the one who took the call," I said. "From the kid, Tyler. I'm the radio host." He frowned, lowered his light slightly. "We traced that call," he said. "It came from this address." My stomach flipped. "No, that's not possible. That house doesn't even have power." He just looked at me for a long second, then said, "Well, it had a phone line. Still connected somehow. No sign of anyone inside, though." I followed him to the porch before he could stop me. The boards creaked under my boots. When he pushed open the door, the smell hit me first: old dust, wet wood, and something faintly metallic. The living room was half collapsed, wallpaper peeling, and the old rotary phone still hung on the wall by the kitchen door. The cord dangled loose, swinging slightly like it had just been used. The officer picked it up, frowned. Dead now. I just stood there, staring at the spot where my father used to sit. That same phone beside him, the one he'd used to call in to my first radio job when I was 17. The one he died near when the fire broke out. The second officer came in, said they'd searched the property. No footprints, no signs of a break-in, no kid. They figured it might have been an old wire signal bouncing or some prank using rerouted lines. I nodded like I believed it, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, because before leaving the studio, I'd heard something else on the call, right before it cut, a whisper that wasn't the boys. Just one word, close to the receiver. "David." My name. They told me to go home, said they'd send someone to check the old phone record. I drove back to the station, heart still pounding. Jerry looked up when I came in. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Cops said it was probably a crossed line." I sat down at my desk and stared at the switchboard. Line 3 was still blinking faintly, as if stuck halfway. I lifted the receiver slowly. Nothing, just faint static. I hung up and tried again. Same thing. Then, out of habit, I checked the station log. The system automatically recorded calls for legal reasons. The entry for line 3 was still open, time-stamped from 11:47 p.m. When I played the recording, it began exactly as I remembered. "Please. I think someone's in my house." But as it continued, I heard things I hadn't noticed before, faint echoes, distant words layered beneath Tyler's voice. It sounded almost like someone else repeating him half a second later, as if 2 lines were bleeding into each other. Then came that final whisper again. "Clear this time, David." I stopped the tape. My throat felt dry. At sunrise, I drove back out there alone. The police had gone, leaving yellow tape across the door. I stepped inside anyway. Every sound echoed too loud in the emptiness. Dust covered everything except the area around the phone, where faint prints marked the wall, small ones, maybe a teenager's. I crouched down and noticed something under the baseboard. A small plastic tag, yellowed with age, half melted. When I picked it up, I saw the name written in faded ink. Tyler McAllister. That name hit me hard. I knew it. Tyler had been my next-door neighbor growing up. He died the same night as my father, both caught in the fire that destroyed half the house. Tyler had been 13. I left the house shaking. By the time I reached my car, I could barely breathe. I sat there with my forehead on the steering wheel until I heard the faint click of my phone ringing. Unknown number. Against every instinct, I answered. Static filled the line, and then that same quiet, trembling voice. "He's back in the hallway." I dropped the phone like it was burning. The screen went black. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep. I'd go into the studio, do my night shifts, and every time Halloween got close again, the switchboard would glitch. Line 3 lighting up on its own, no caller ID, no voice when I picked up. I replaced the system, switched cables, even moved booths. It didn't matter. The call always came. Last year, I finally had the phone company trace the signal. The technician looked confused when he came back with the report. "That line's been disconnected for over 30 years, he said. "No active number, but it keeps routing through a physical connection, an analog port, way out near Mount Hope." He showed me the map. The signal originated from the exact same property. That night, I drove there one last time. I parked across the road and sat staring at the shell of the house. The moonlight caught the window glass, what little of it remained, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing inside. Not a shadow, a clear outline of a boy, holding a phone to his ear. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then I realized something I hadn't before: the details Tyler described that night. The sound of the back door creaking open, the footsteps in the hall, the man trying the handle. That house had only one hallway, only one office, only one locked door. It was my father's. I remembered being a kid, hearing my father yelling that someone had broken in just before the fire started. I'd run outside. Tyler hadn't. He'd gone next door, to help. When I got out of the car and stepped onto the porch, I whispered into the silence, "It's over now. You're safe." The wind caught the loose phone cord and made it sway gently against the wall, tapping once, twice, then still. I waited. Nothing else happened. I haven't heard the call again since then. Not on Halloween, not any night. Sometimes, when I drive past that road, I still glance at the burned-out house, and for a second, I almost expect to see that blinking red light again. Line 3, waiting for me to pick up, but I don't. I've learned that some voices call only until you listen, really listen to what they were trying to say all along. And that night, I think I finally did. I was halfway up the ridge when the first lantern light appeared through the trees. At first, I thought it was a hunter, someone heading home late from the woods. But no one hunts on Halloween night in Elkins, not since the boy went missing back in '80. The glow moved slow, steady, like someone carrying it carefully, and I swear I heard the crunch of boots on gravel, soft, deliberate. My throat tightened. I was supposed to be alone. I'd come up there to see for myself if the stories were true, if the lantern boy really walked the forest edge this time every year. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept going, telling myself it was probably just a neighbor, or some kids with a flashlight. But the light flickered in a way flashlights don't. It swayed, the way an oil flame does when someone breathes near it. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. I could smell damp wood and iron, that metallic tang that always means water or rust or blood. When I finally reached the clearing, there was nothing, no one holding a lantern, no sound except wind in the trees. But the ground in front of me was wet, glistening, and the leaves were flattened, as if someone had been standing right there seconds ago. You know that feeling when your brain refuses to believe what your eyes tell it? That's what hit me. I'd grown up hearing about that boy Eli Harper, 14, disappeared, gathering wood for the Halloween bonfire. My dad helped in the search party. They never found him, but for years after, people swore they saw a lantern bobbing near the old mine trail. I used to laugh about it. Then, one night, my dog went missing in the same woods, and something about the timing, about the way the wind carried a faint cry, it made me start thinking maybe the stories weren't just stories. I decided to go up there alone that Halloween, 40 years after Eli vanished. I brought a flashlight, not a lantern, and a small knife, though I wasn't sure what good it'd do against ghosts or people. The further I went, the more the woods seemed to fold in on themselves. The trail got narrow, the air pressed against my ears like cotton. Then came that smell again, iron, wet earth, something decaying but old, and that light, always just far enough ahead that I couldn't see who carried it. I started calling out, "Hello, you okay out there?" But my voice came back smaller than I sent it, like the trees swallowed it before it reached anyone. When the light stopped moving, I felt relief. At least now I could catch up. I walked faster, then broke into a jog, but when I reached the bend, there was nothing, just a rotted tree stump with a rusted lantern resting on top of it. The glass was cracked, but a faint orange glow burned inside. I bent closer and realized it wasn't a candle, it was a small gas flame, still flickering. Someone had lit it recently. I looked around, scanning the dark, and that's when I noticed the footprints. Bare feet, small ones, leading away from the stump, straight toward the mine trail that's been closed for decades. I told myself it could have been kids playing a prank, but those prints were sunk deep, like whoever made them was heavy, dragging. I followed them. I don't even know why, curiosity, stupidity, maybe both. The further I went, the quieter it got. No bugs, no wind, not even the sound of my own steps after a while. Then the ground dipped, and I nearly slipped into a hole covered by leaves. When I brushed them aside, I saw a wooden shaft door, half buried in dirt, the old mine. The boards had been pried open recently. You could still see splinters along the nails. I crouched down, aiming my flashlight inside. There was a tunnel, narrow and slick with moisture. It smelled like rot and something else, kerosene. I called out, "Eli?" I don't even know why I said his name. The echo that came back didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone whispering my name instead. I stepped back fast, heart pounding, and nearly fell when the lantern on the stump behind me flared bright for a split second, then went out. I turned around, flashlight shaking, and saw movement deeper in the tunnel. A shape, hunched, holding something shiny. My mouth went dry. The shape stepped closer, and the beam caught its face, or what was left of one. The skin looked gray, stretched thin, but the eyes, God, they looked alive. It was a boy, or had been. The lantern he held was old, dented, covered in soot. I stammered, "Who are you?" But he didn't speak. He just turned and started walking deeper inside. I followed without meaning to. Every instinct screamed to run, but some part of me needed to know where he was leading me. The tunnel twisted for what felt like forever, until it opened into a wider chamber. I could barely breathe. The air was thick and foul. My flashlight beam hit something metallic, rows of rusted barrels stacked against the wall. Then I noticed the symbols painted on them, an old moon and star mark I'd seen once in my granddad's photo album from his mining days. And then the smell clicked. Not just kerosene liquor. Those barrels weren't old mining supplies. They were for moonshine. Someone had been using this place recently. The boy stopped near one barrel and pointed at it. His finger trembled. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The lid wasn't sealed tight. I pried it open, and the smell hit me full force, alcohol mixed with decay. Inside wasn't liquid, it was rags. Old, soaked rags. And bones. Small bones. I gagged, dropped the lid, and stumbled back. The boy lowered his lantern and stared at me, as if waiting for something. Behind us, I heard voices, real ones. Men, talking low, getting closer. My stomach turned cold. I ducked behind a pile of barrels and killed my light. The boy's lantern dimmed, like he understood. 3 men came into view, 1 carrying a flashlight, 2 dragging what looked like a duffel bag. "Keep it quiet," one said. "Sheriff's been sniffing around again." The other replied, "Ain't nobody coming up here Halloween night. They think the place is haunted, remember?" They laughed softly. My pulse thudded in my ears. I peeked over and saw them open the duffel. Inside were bottles, freshly filled moonshine. They'd been smuggling out of here for who knows how long. The boy glanced at me again, eyes glowing faintly in the lantern light, and pointed toward a crack in the wall. I hesitated, but when one of the men dropped his flashlight and it rolled my way, I dove into the crack without thinking. It opened into a crawl space just big enough for me to squeeze through. The air was so thin I could barely breathe. Behind me, I heard the men curse when they found the fallen lantern. "Who the hell left this burning?" one shouted. Then came a hiss, like gas leaking. "You smell that?" another said. My heart sank. Kerosene. They'd knocked something over. The boy was still in the main chamber, staring right at me through the gap, his expression calm, almost peaceful. I wanted to yell for him to run, but before I could, the light exploded. The blast hit like thunder. The tunnel roared with heat and smoke. I crawled fast, coughing, clawing at dirt, trying to find the way out. I could feel the fire chasing the air out of the passage. Somehow, I broke through to the surface, gasping, my clothes singed. The hillside behind me was glowing orange, smoke pouring from the mine entrance. I stumbled down the ridge toward the road. When I looked back, for a moment, I saw him standing in front of the flames, lantern still burning, face soft and young again. Then he vanished in the smoke. By the time the fire crews came, the mine had collapsed completely. They found 2 of the men's remains, burned beyond recognition. The third was never found. The sheriff called it an illegal distillery accident. I didn't tell him about the boy, I couldn't. Who'd believe me? They sealed off the ridge after that. Nobody's allowed near it anymore. A year later, I moved away from Elkins, but every Halloween, I dream about that night. The woods, the lantern, that quiet boy leading me deeper in. I've tried to rationalize it, maybe he was just a hallucination from the smoke or fear, but it doesn't explain the footprints. The morning after the fire, before the rain started, I went back up there. Couldn't help myself. The ground around the collapsed entrance was charred, blackened. But there were footprints again, bare, small ones leading away from the site toward the tree line. I followed them until they disappeared at the edge of the creek. That's when I saw it. A single lantern sitting on a rock, glass clean, flame steady, as if someone had just set it down. I didn't touch it, just stood there, watching the light flicker. When the wind finally blew it out, I swear I heard a boy's voice whisper, "Thank you. It's been years since then." I tell myself I only went up there to prove a legend wrong, but sometimes I wonder if he brought me there on purpose, if he needed someone to uncover what happened, to end whatever loop he'd been trapped in. The sheriff said those barrels dated back to the 42nds, that some local men had kept using the tunnels to smuggle liquor and hide bodies when deals went bad. They found several skeletons down there once they cleared the wreckage, including one small enough to belong to a teenage boy. They reburied the remains properly that winter. The local paper ran a small piece, "Lantern Boy Mystery Finally Solved After 40 Years. But I didn't go to the ceremony. Couldn't. Because deep down, I know it wasn't solved. The last time I visited Elkins, I drove past the ridge just as dusk fell. The tree line looked the same, dark, still, watching. And right where the old trail used to start, a faint orange light flickered once, then faded like someone walking away. with a lantern held low, guiding the way for someone else to follow. That's when I realized something that still keeps me up. That night, when the tunnel blew, the boy wasn't scared. He didn't try to run. He looked relieved. I think he stayed behind because someone had to. The fire took the smugglers, but he stayed to make sure no one else would ever go down there again. So now, whenever I see a lantern on a porch or a jack-o'-lantern glow on Halloween, I think of Eli Harper, still watching those hills, still keeping the light burning for anyone foolish enough to wander in after him. And sometimes, when the night's quiet enough, I swear I can smell that faint trace of kerosene and hear soft footsteps pacing just beyond the tree line like he's making sure I remember. And I do, every year. Because once you've seen the lantern boy, you never forget the way his light looks in the dark. I still can't shake the feeling of being watched. It was the first night we arrived at the cabin, tucked away in the remote corners of Bloodstone Mountain, Georgia. The air felt different, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. You know when something's off, but you can't name it? That's how it was. We were supposed to have fun, a weekend getaway, to disconnect from work, to drink and laugh like we used to back in college. We'd rented this old cabin for the weekend, thinking it was just going to be like all the other trips we'd taken in the past. We were wrong. I'd only been in the cabin for about an hour when I noticed the silence. At first, I thought it was just the isolation, mountains and all that, but as I looked around, it felt like the silence was waiting for something. I tried to push it out of my mind, blaming it on too many late nights at the office. But then Ben started asking questions. "Do you guys feel that?" he said, looking up from his phone. Ben was always the curious one, the first to get spooked when something seemed off. The others laughed it off, but Ben's face looked like he'd seen something. His eyes were wide, and his skin was pale. "Feel what?" I asked, pushing my glasses back up my nose as I rummaged through the pantry. "The air, man. It's thick." He didn't finish the sentence, but I could see that he was already regretting bringing it up. Nina laughed. She was sitting by the window, scrolling through her Instagram. "You're being dramatic. It's just the mountain air. Relax." But Ben wasn't so easily distracted. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if he was expecting someone or something behind him. I couldn't help but glance over at him every now and then, watching as his paranoia slowly crept into his expression. By nightfall, I knew something wasn't right. Maybe it was the shadows, or maybe it was the way the wind moved through the trees, but the cabin felt like it was breathing with us. I didn't say anything, though. What would I say? "Hey guys, I think this place is haunted?" No, I just tried to brush it off. We gathered around the fireplace, cracking open the beers and talking about anything and everything, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was watching us from the woods outside. Ben was quiet, though. He didn't even join in the conversation, just sat there with his eyes darting to the door every few minutes. "We should go hiking tomorrow," Nina suggested, trying to get the energy back up. But I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't all that comfortable either. She just didn't want to be the first one to admit it. "Yeah, sure," I said, offering a forced smile. "We'll go hiking. We'll have fun. It's just a cabin in the woods. Nothing weird about it." But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. Every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw something moving in the trees, a shadow that didn't belong, but when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe Ben's unease was rubbing off on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises from the woods, twigs snapping, distant rustling, like someone or something was walking around the cabin. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just animals, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the sounds kept coming, until I finally gave in and got out of bed to check the locks on the doors and windows. That's when I saw something that froze me in my tracks. The woods were empty, but the moonlight illuminated something strange in the distance, what looked like a figure standing just inside the tree line. A person, but they didn't move. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then I saw it shift. No, not a trick. Someone was standing there, watching the cabin. I didn't scream, but my heart nearly exploded in my chest. I backed away slowly, not wanting to alert whoever or whatever it was. I couldn't wake the others. They'd think I was overreacting, and maybe I was. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there. I'm not sure how long I stared at it before I finally couldn't take it anymore and ran back to my room. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, but the figure never left my mind. When morning came, I tried to act normal, but the others could tell I wasn't myself. "You look like you saw a ghost?" Nina teased, but I could tell by the look on her face that she was just as unsettled as I was. "I didn't sleep well," I said, hoping to brush it off. "Let's just go for that hike." We set out into the mountains shortly after breakfast, trying to push our discomfort aside. We didn't talk much. The forest felt different, thicker, denser. The trees seemed to close in on us, and every step felt like it was leading us deeper into something we couldn't escape. We made our way down a narrow trail, and it wasn't long before we reached a small clearing. That's when we found it, the old stone circle. It was like something out of a history book, the rocks arranged in a perfect ring, weathered by time but still imposing. The air grew colder as we stepped closer. "What the hell is this?" Ben asked, his voice shaky. He had been in a similar spot before, but something was different this time. I saw the way he looked at the rocks, like they were alive. "That's not normal," Nina said, stepping back, clearly uncomfortable. I felt it too, like the ground itself was vibrating beneath us. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, and I couldn't shake the sense that we had stumbled upon something that wasn't meant to be discovered. "We should leave," I said. "Now." But Ben didn't want to leave. He was drawn to the circle, his eyes fixated on something I couldn't see. "Ben, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. But he shrugged me off. He stepped into the trees, the center of the circle. That's when things started going wrong. The sky darkened in an instant, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. We tried to call out to Ben, but no sound came from our mouths. The earth beneath us seemed to tremble, and then a voice low and guttural spoke from the trees. "We warned you," it whispered, so softly it was barely audible. "Now you will pay." Ben's eyes widened, and before we could stop him, he collapsed to his knees. Something invisible seemed to drag him deeper into the circle, and we could only watch as he screamed, his body contorting unnaturally. I ran to him, but it was too late. The moment I touched him, I felt the coldness of death in my bones. Ben's body went limp in my arms. His eyes were wide open, but they were empty. There was nothing there anymore. We fled from the circle, running back through the woods, but it was as though the forest had transformed into something else. We couldn't find the path, couldn't hear anything except for the sound of our own ragged breathing. When we finally made it back to the cabin, we were breathless, hysterical. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to be found. Ben's body was gone. The circle was gone. The forest was still. It was as though we had imagined it all. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the look in Ben's eyes when he disappeared. That night, the air was thick again, and I could hear that same voice in the wind. The spirits were watching, and they weren't finished with us. I don't know how I made it out of there alive, but I did. We all did, except for Ben. Now, every time I hear a whisper in the woods, I think of that day. I think of the circle, the figure in the distance, and the voices that will never leave me. And I know, deep down, that Bloodstone Mountain isn't done with me yet. I never expected to end up telling you this story. You know, I'm not one for sensationalizing things, but I don't think I've ever been so sure of what I experienced in my life. I've told a few people here and there, but nobody really listens. They say it's just my imagination, that I was too isolated, but I can't ignore what I saw. I can't pretend it didn't happen. It was 1987. I'd just gotten out of a pretty tough relationship, the kind that leaves you exhausted, unsure of who you are, and searching for anything to clear your head. I rented a cabin in Hidden Grove, a place way out in the mountains of West Virginia. I didn't care where it was. All I needed was peace, somewhere I could be alone. The owners of the cabin promised me a rustic escape, and that's exactly what I got. The cabin was a little more rundown than I expected, but it was perfect in a way. No distractions, no neighbors, just me and the woods. I didn't think I'd regret it. The first night, everything seemed fine. I settled in, put my things away, lit a fire, and spent the evening reading. It was quiet. So quiet. There was no sound of cars or people, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. I felt this weird calm settle over me, the kind that only comes when you're truly alone, far from everything. But then, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it, a woman crying. Soft at first, almost like it was part of the wind. But it wasn't. The sound was too human, too deliberate. The crying seemed to echo through the trees, rising and falling in waves, like someone mourning something lost. It wasn't close, but it wasn't distant either. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, or maybe a neighbor nearby. The nearest house was miles away, but maybe someone had a dog that sounded like a person. I tried to dismiss it, but it didn't stop. It lasted for hours. The sound of crying, like a soul torn apart by grief. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. I felt rooted to the spot, just listening to that wailing. I pulled the covers over my head and told myself I was imagining things. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I thought it might stop, it would start again. By morning, the crying was gone, and I tried to act like nothing had happened. I went about my day, hiking in the woods, making tea, reading my book, but the crying was still there, echoing in the back of my mind. I thought maybe it had been an animal, or perhaps a trick of the wind. But as the sun set that second night, I heard it again, louder this time, closer. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was trying to tell me something. I had to know what it was. So, around midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods, following the sound. The trees were thick, the air damp and cool. The flashlight beam danced over the underbrush, and every snap of a twig underfoot felt too loud, too obvious. I didn't know why I was going, why I felt this overwhelming need to know what was happening, but something in me couldn't stop. I needed to understand. I walked for what felt like hours, the crying growing louder the deeper I went. It wasn't a distant sound anymore. It was right there. I could feel it, could almost touch it. My pulse was racing, my hands trembling, but I pressed on. I knew something was out there, something I had to see, something I had to understand. Eventually I reached a clearing, and that's when I saw it. The remnants of what looked like an old family home. It wasn't much anymore, just a few half-burned beams and a collapsed roof, but the sight of it made my stomach churn. The place had been abandoned for years, but there was something about it, something in the air that felt wrong. A shiver ran down my spine. And that's when I saw the bodies. They were scattered around the clearing, lying among the remnants of the home like forgotten relics. Old clothing, worn shoes, twisted limbs. They weren't alive. I could tell that instantly. These were the remains of people who had been left to rot in the woods, forgotten and ignored by the world. I felt my knees go weak as I stumbled forward, the beam of my flashlight falling on an old, weathered trunk nearby. I dared to look closer, my heart pounding as I reached down and pulled the lid open. Inside, there was a small stack of papers and a diary. I opened the diary first. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. I began reading, my hands shaking as the words slowly became clear. The 15th of April, 1930. They are coming tonight. I can hear them in the woods. I have to protect my children. The rest of the pages were filled with frantic scribbles, desperate warnings, and prayers. I could feel my breath catch in my throat as I read. The entries were dated, starting months before, each one more frantic than the last. Whoever had written these words had known something was coming, something terrible. And then, as I flipped to the last entry, I froze. The 3rd of June, 1930. It's too late. They are dead. We are all dead. They killed my family. The final entry was a single, terrifying sentence. The woman will cry forever. She will never rest. That was when it hit me. The crying, the wailing, it wasn't random. It wasn't just some animal in the woods. It was the spirit of a woman, trapped in grief and rage. She had lost her family, and now she was calling out to anyone who might listen. She was trapped in that place, just like the others who had died there. The massacre, the bloodshed, it all came rushing back. I couldn't leave. I couldn't just walk away from this. I had to know what happened. I looked around, and that's when I saw the mass grave, the place where the family had been buried, unceremoniously, without a proper funeral. Their bodies had been left to rot, forgotten by the world. And the woman, she couldn't rest because her family had been taken from her, and their murderers had never been brought to justice. I ran back to the cabin, panic gripping me as the crying grew louder in my ears. I wasn't sure if I could escape whatever had followed me back, but I had to try. I slammed the door shut and locked it, not knowing what to expect. All I could think about was the diary, those last words. The woman's spirit was still here, still searching for something. Maybe she wanted justice. Maybe she just wanted someone to hear her. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The crying was constant, every night, louder and more intense. It was as if the woman was closing in on me, inching closer to my doorstep. The fear was overwhelming. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The pull of the place, the unfinished business, it was like a force I couldn't resist. On the 5th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, grabbed the diary, and left the cabin. As I walked down the path that led back to the main road, I looked back, and for a brief moment, I swear I saw her. The woman. Standing in the clearing, her silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. Her arms were outstretched, as if she was reaching for something or someone. I never went back to Hidden Grove. I don't know if the woman ever found peace, or if she's still out there, crying in the woods, waiting for someone to help her. I'll never forget that feeling of being watched, of being drawn into something far beyond my understanding. But one thing I know for sure, whatever happened to that family, whatever curse was placed on them, it wasn't finished. It's still there, in the woods, and I'll never be able to forget it. I never believed in ghosts. I always thought people who talked about hauntings were just looking for attention, trying to rationalize things they couldn't explain. That was before Widow's Hollow, before I spent months in that cabin, before I saw her. I remember the first night like it was yesterday. It was one of those moments you can't forget, the kind that shapes you in a way you'll never be the same again. I wasn't expecting anything, nothing out of the ordinary anyway. I just needed a break. The house we lived in after John died had too many memories. Every corner seemed to breathe his presence. So, when the cabin came up, tucked away in some forgotten hollow in Pennsylvania, I thought it'd be the perfect place to heal. The isolation was supposed to help me breathe again, let me figure out how to be myself without him. The first week was uneventful, the silence peaceful. No city noise, no distractions, just the wind in the trees and the occasional distant crow. It should have been a comfort, but it never felt like one. The air had a heaviness to it that I couldn't shake. Still, I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the grief making everything feel wrong. I should have known from the first night. When I laid in bed, the quiet was almost too loud. The kind of quiet that gets into your bones and makes everything feel stretched, like something was about to break. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, my breath caught in my throat. At first, I couldn't remember why. There was no sound, no movement, but something was there, something I couldn't name. I sat up, listening. The room was still, except for a faint scratching sound. It came from the wall near the foot of the bed. It wasn't a rat, or at least it didn't sound like one. It was slower, more deliberate. I got out of bed, heart hammering, and pulled the covers back to look at the wall. There was nothing. Of course there was nothing. But that scratching didn't stop. It continued for what felt like hours, dragging along the wood like fingernails on a chalkboard. It grew louder. I tried to tell myself it was just a tree branch scraping against the wall outside. But I knew it wasn't. It was too close. Too inside. My fingers were shaking as I reached for the light, flicking it on and off, but nothing helped. The sound only seemed to get louder the longer I stayed in the room. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my robe and walked out of the cabin. The cool air hit me, and for a second, it cleared my mind. I thought maybe I was just losing my grip on reality. Grief does strange things to you, makes you hear things, see things. The night wrapped around me like a shroud, and I thought I could just walk it off. But I didn't go far. Just as I was about to turn back, I noticed it. The small wooden structure at the edge of the trees. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't visible from the cabin, hidden behind the thick brush. I should have turned around, gone back to the warmth of my bed. But something compelled me to walk toward it, drawn in by the curiosity I couldn't shake. As I got closer, the air felt different, heavier. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the rusted handle. Something in my gut twisted. But then the door creaked open, as if it were waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick, stale with the smell of mold and decay. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the photograph. Framed, hanging crookedly on the wall. A woman. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt an icy chill run down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but I knew it was her. The woman in the picture was dead. The cabin felt like it had been frozen in time, as if she was still here, waiting. I backed away from the photograph, my mind racing. It wasn't just the picture, the entire cabin felt wrong. Something about it felt familiar. I left. The next morning I didn't tell anyone about it. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, nothing more than a trick of the dark. But the dreams started that night. They were subtle at first. Soft whispers, like someone calling my name from the edge of sleep. Then, the nightmares. They weren't just dreams, though. They felt like memories, like I was living someone else's life. In the dreams, I saw her, the woman from the photograph. Her life seemed to play out in front of me, like a movie. She had been happy, once, but then, something had changed. She was alone, isolated, like me. But she wasn't just lonely, she was terrified. I couldn't make sense of it. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, only to fall asleep again and feel her presence, like she was there in the room with me. The dreams became more vivid, more real, and the scratches returned. Always at night, always from the walls. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. So I went back to the cabin in the woods, the one I'd seen that first night. I had to figure out what had happened there, what was pulling me back. When I opened the door this time, the stench of rot hit me harder. The photo was still there, but this time, something had changed. The woman's smile had shifted, just slightly, to something darker, as if she knew I was coming. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned the cabin. That's when I saw it. The floorboard near the corner had been disturbed. It was warped, slightly raised. I didn't want to touch it, but I had no choice. I pulled it up, my hands shaking. Beneath it, there was a letter, yellowed and fragile. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a confession. The woman, her name was Margaret. Margaret, who had come to Widow's Hollow years ago with her husband, the same as I had. But Margaret's story wasn't the same as mine. She hadn't been left to grieve. She had been murdered. Her husband had killed. They had covered it up, made it look like an accident. And his family had helped him. They had buried her secret, hidden it in the cabin, left her spirit to linger. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that letter. But when I heard the noise again, the scratching, coming from behind me, I knew it wasn't just Margaret, it was him, her husband. He was still there, his presence lingering like a dark stain. I could feel him, like a weight on my chest, pressing down on me. The air was suffocating now. The temperature dropped, and I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking toward me. I turned, heart in my throat, and there he was. The figure of a man, indistinct but solid. He was staring at me with cold eyes, eyes that didn't belong to a living person. That was when I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. I don't remember the walk, the panic, the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. All I remember is that I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I packed my things that night. I left Widow's Hollow without a second thought, without a goodbye to the cabin or the memories I thought I'd find there. I knew then that some ghosts can never be laid to rest. Some stories can't be buried in the past, no matter how hard you try. Margaret's spirit hadn't been the only one tied to that place, neither had her husband's. I had become part of their story. Whether I liked it or not, I never went back. But I know she's still there. I can feel her in the quiet sometimes, in the moments when I least expect it. And whenever I hear a scratching sound in the distance, my heart still skips a beat. I can still feel it, the oppressive weight of that night pressing on me like a dark shadow. I'm not sure where to start, because even now, the memories are tangled, like vines that won't let go. Maybe it's best to begin when it all went wrong, when we were all so sure it would be just another adventure, a harmless excursion into the unknown. I should have known better. It was just supposed to be an evening of fun, a little thrill-seeking to break up the monotony of university life in Cluj. You know how it is when you're in your early 20s, when the world feels like one big playground and you're invincible. We had all heard the rumors about the alchemist's house, how it had been abandoned for centuries, the once grand mansion now crumbling into ruins. Some said it was haunted, others whispered about it being cursed. To us, it was just another challenge, another mystery to unravel. I remember the group clearly: Lucian, who was always the leader, the one who dared the most, and then there was Elena, always skeptical, but in that way, that made her the perfect partner for Lucian's wild ideas. Adrian, who tagged along because he was too shy to stay behind, and of course Radu, the guy with the camera, always looking to make a video out of whatever mischief we got up to. And then there was me, the quiet one, always there but never quite in the center of things. We all gathered in front of the ruins around dusk, our voices echoing off the walls as we joked about the ghost stories we'd heard over the years. The house itself was more of a shell, its once grand walls now crumbled, overtaken by vines and decay. There was an eerie stillness to it, but nothing about it seemed particularly threatening at first glance. I remember walking through the broken doors, the stale air smelling of mildew and dust, and feeling that slight tremor of excitement that came from venturing into something forbidden. Lucian, as usual, was the first to explore, calling out for the rest of us to follow. We trailed behind him, Radu filming every step, and Elena, as always, making sarcastic comments about the whole thing. I stayed near the back, trying to shake the sense that something wasn't quite right. There was an odd feeling in the air, like the house itself was waiting for something, or someone. We spent the next few hours exploring the decaying rooms, finding nothing more than old furniture, broken glass, and ancient cobwebs. It wasn't until we reached the basement that things started to take a turn. The door was half-rotted, barely hanging on its hinges, but Lucian pushed it open without a second thought. We followed him down the narrow steps, the wooden floorboards creaking under our feet. It smelled worse down here, musty, like wet stone, and something else I couldn't quite place, something metallic. In the center of the room, there was an altar of sorts, though it was barely more than a stone slab. Strange symbols were carved into the walls around it, faded by time but still visible. At first, we thought it was some kind of ancient ritual site, just another piece of local legend. But then Radu noticed something strange. On the stone slab, there was a book, old, leather-bound, with gold leaf trim that shimmered faintly in the dim light of our flashlights. He picked it up, flipping through the pages with curiosity. "Guys, this is weird," Radu said, his voice shaky. "It's written in some kind of language I don't recognize. This doesn't look like any old book." We crowded around him, peering over his shoulder at the pages. I couldn't read it, but the symbols were strange, almost hypnotic, like they were pulling at something deep inside me. Lucian grinned, his usual cocky self. "Looks like we've found the real treasure." But as soon as his fingers brushed the pages, the temperature in the room dropped. I felt it immediately, like a cold gust of wind had swept through the room, though there were no windows down here, no way for the air to move. I shivered, my breath coming out in visible puffs. Then, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, like distant murmurs, barely perceptible, but they grew louder, insistent, filling the room with a low, rhythmic hum. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, as the voices seemed to wrap around me, echoing in my skull. It wasn't a language I recognized, but there was a strange, unsettling rhythm to it, like a chant. "Did you hear that?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably just the wind," Lucian said, but his bravado had faltered. I didn't believe him. The air felt thick, suffocating. Something was coming. That's when the first one disappeared. It was Adrian. One moment, he was standing next to us, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear, and the next, he was gone. There was no sound, no warning. Just a flicker of movement, and then he wasn't there anymore. We all froze, staring at the empty space where he had been standing. Radu dropped the camera, his hands shaking. "What the hell just happened?" he said, his voice cracking. Lucian's face turned ashen. "Adrian, where did you go?" he called, his voice shaking, but there was no answer. We searched the room frantically, calling his name, but it was like he had just vanished. The only thing left was that damn book, now sitting ominously on the altar, the pages flicking open as if it were being blown by an invisible wind. "Guys, we need to get out of here," Elena said, her voice breaking. She sounded terrified, more so than I'd ever heard her. But Lucian shook his head. "We can't leave. We have to figure out what's happening." That's when it started. One by one, we began to vanish. It wasn't like Adrian, where he simply disappeared. No, for each of us, there was something else. Radu was the next to go. He had been trying to film, his camera shaking in his hands when he suddenly stopped, looking up with wide eyes. The whispers in the air grew louder, almost deafening, and his body convulsed as if something was inside him. Before any of us could react, he simply crumbled to the ground, his body turning to ash, leaving nothing but his camera, still recording. I wanted to scream, but the fear lodged in my throat. My body was frozen, my mind racing with panic and confusion. What was happening? What had we done? Then, Elena screamed. She screamed so loudly that it echoed off the walls of the basement, but her voice was abruptly cut off. I looked around, my heart hammering in my chest, and found her nowhere in sight. Her scream lingered in the air for a moment, but it was fading, as if it was being pulled into the depths of the house. It was just me now. I stumbled back to the altar, the book still open, its pages now glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The symbols that had once seemed so foreign now began to make sense. The ritual, the words, it was all falling into place in my mind. I understood now what had happened to my friends. The alchemist, in his greed for immortality, had bound his soul to this house, and by disturbing his resting place, we had awakened him. The final ritual was clear in the book. I could feel the energy of it thrumming in my veins. It was a chance, a way to stop it, to break the curse. But it required a sacrifice my life. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to become one of them, a servant to the alchemist. But there was no choice. The book's pull was too strong. I grabbed the closest sharp object I could find, an old dagger, and in the quietest moment of clarity I had, I began to chant the final words of the ritual, the ones that would break the alchemist's hold on the house. As I spoke them, I could feel the pressure in the air lift, the whispers fading. But before I could finish, I heard the final words of the alchemist himself, echoing in my ears. "You will never escape." And then, silence. I was halfway through mopping the tiled floor behind the counter when I noticed movement through the glass doors. At first, I thought it was just another drunk group stumbling back from one of the late pubs, but when I looked closer, I saw two small figures standing near Pump 3. Kids. 2 of them. I blinked and rubbed at my eyes because it didn't make sense. It was close to midnight, and no one brought children to a petrol station at that hour. Not in the middle of Limerick on a weeknight. I leaned against the counter, squinting through the glass. They weren't doing anything, just standing close together, facing the road, holding hands like they were waiting for someone. I checked outside the shop for a parent, but the car park was empty. My first thought was maybe someone pulled in, left the kids for a moment, and ran to the bathroom. I grabbed the keys for the outside loo and stepped out, calling, "Hello? Anyone here? Your kids are out by the pumps." A voice sounded thin in the stillness. Nobody answered. The children didn't even turn around when I called. I got this strange feeling in my chest, like a little knot tightening. The boy looked to be around 8, the girl maybe 6. They wore light-colored clothes, old-fashioned somehow, like too neat for children out at night. Their shoes were polished, and the girl's dress hung just below her knees. I started walking toward them, but then a car swung into the station. The headlights caught the children square on, and I expected them to scatter or at least flinch, but they just stood still. The driver braked hard, swerved, and pulled up to Pump 5 instead, shaking his head at the wheel. I waved to him, trying to laugh it off, but he didn't even glance at the kids. That's when something hit me. He hadn't seen them. He had swerved like he was dodging something, yet he didn't acknowledge them at all. I looked back, and the kids were gone, just like that. My heart thudded, and I walked back into the shop. I told myself maybe they'd run off behind the bins, but it bothered me enough that I checked the CCTV. The screen was split into 4 feeds, showing the forecourt. I rolled back the tape a minute, and there it was, the car pulling in, the swerve, the hard brake. But no kids, no movement. The pumps were empty. I must have watched it 10 times, leaning closer until my nose almost touched the monitor. My throat was dry. I'd seen them with my own eyes, clear as day, but the footage didn't back me up. I started talking out loud to myself, muttering, "Don't be stupid, you're tired, it's just your head playing tricks." I tried to shake it off, but a part of me was already afraid of what else I might see that night. Around half an hour later, another car pulled in. A woman in her 30s stepped out to fill her tank. As she was paying at the counter, I noticed movement on the screen again, two little figures, walking slowly between the pumps. I froze, glancing back and forth between the CCTV and the window. From where I stood, the forecourt looked empty, but on the screen, the children were there, weaving around her car like moths around a lamp. The woman noticed me staring at the monitor. "What is it?" she asked, sounding nervous. I forced a smile. "Nothing, just checking the pumps." She gave me a funny look, but left it at that. The second she drove off, I rewound the tape. Same as before, the children were gone from the playback, as if they'd never been there. My stomach knotted up tighter. I decided to lock the shop door and call my supervisor. When he answered, I explained quickly what I'd seen. He sighed and said, "Look, it's midnight. You've been on since 6. You're just tired. Don't wind yourself up. If it gets too much, close the forecourt until morning." He hung up before I could argue. I didn't want to look weak, so I stayed. But I kept replaying those images in my head. Why? Kids? Why at midnight? Why me? I told myself I'd finish my shift and never take a night one again. It must have been around 2 in the morning when a taxi rolled in. The driver filled up, came inside, and leaned on the counter, yawning. We chatted a bit, just to break the silence. That's when I glanced up at the monitor again. My stomach dropped. The children were standing directly behind his car, side by side, staring at the boot. I gripped the counter so hard, my knuckles whitened. "Do you see anyone out there?" I asked him. He turned, shrugged, and said, "Nope, empty." I didn't want to scare him, so I stayed quiet, but I couldn't stop staring at the screen. Then the girl tilted her head upward, directly into the camera, and for the first time I saw her face properly. Pale skin, dark hollows where her eyes should have been. My chest tightened like a fist clamped around my lungs. The boy turned next, and it was the same black sockets, no eyes, no expression, just staring into the lens. I must have gasped because the taxi driver frowned at me. "You all right?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, just tired." He left, and the moment his car pulled out, the children vanished from the monitor. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay put. Something in me felt like if I ran, they'd follow. Instead, I kept glancing at the monitor, heart pounding so loud it hurt. Every tick of the clock was torture. At around 3, another driver nearly plowed into pump 2, swerving violently before stopping. He came storming inside, cursing about damn brats running around the pumps. I froze. My blood turned to ice. "You saw them?" I whispered. He glared at me. "Of course I saw them. Nearly wrecked my car because of them. Where are their parents?" I didn't know what to say. "Sir, the cameras don't show anything." He leaned over the counter, furious. "Are you calling me blind?" I swerved because they were right there. We went outside together. He pointed furiously. 2 of them, standing right here. But the concrete was empty, just damp and glistening under the lights. He muttered curses and drove off, but I stood there shivering. At least I knew I wasn't losing my mind. By 4, I couldn't take it anymore. I kept hearing faint noises, like little shoes tapping on the tiles, soft laughter right behind me. But every time I turned, no one was there. I unplugged the monitor. I thought maybe if I couldn't see them, they couldn't get closer. I was wrong. When I turned back toward the counter, the glass door showed their reflection, 2 small figures standing inside the shop, right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My knees nearly buckled. I pressed my back against the till, whispering, "Please, just stop, leave me alone." My own voice cracked like I was begging. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, my supervisor was shaking. My shoulder, daylight spilling through the glass. He frowned. "Why's the monitor unplugged? And why are the pumps closed?" I mumbled, something about feeling sick. I didn't tell him everything. How could I? Who'd believe me? But the strangest part came a week later. A regular old man who'd lived in the area all his life came in, saw me pale and jumpy, and asked what was wrong. Against my better judgment, I told him. His face went serious, and he said quietly, "That station was built on the site of a crash. Back in the 70s, a car hit 2 children on the road just there. Both killed instantly. Driver swerved to avoid them, but it was too late." I felt cold all over. "Are you saying?" He nodded slowly. "Some nights, people still see them. They wander the pumps, like they're waiting to be taken home. I never worked a night shift again. Even now, when I drive past that station, I don't look toward the forecourt, because in my mind's eye, I can still see them, small hands clasped, eyeless faces tilted up toward me, waiting." I was 13 the night it happened, and I remember because I had just started biking farther from home, testing the edges of freedom my parents reluctantly gave me. The gas station on Tay Street was my usual turning point. It wasn't anything special: 2 pumps, a flickering sign, and a payphone by the side wall. I stopped there more often than I needed, partly because it felt like the last safe place before the stretch of road that turned into farmland. That night, though, something about the quiet around the station made me want to hear my dad's voice before I rode home. I propped my bike against the wall, dug out a few coins from my pocket, and slipped them into the slot of the payphone. The receiver was cool against my ear, and the low hum of the line steadied me. I dialed our home number. It rang once, twice, and then clicked as someone picked up. My father's voice came through, but it wasn't right. The words were clear, but there was no warmth, none of the easy tone he usually had when he said hello. Instead, he said my name with a strange edge, as though he were standing just behind me, testing the sound of it. "Dad?" I asked, feeling a wave of relief anyway, because it was his voice. "It's me. I'm at the station. Just wanted to check in before I came home." There was a pause. Then the line hissed with a crackle, and he said, almost whispering, "Don't turn around." I froze, my heart jolting like I'd swallowed ice. I hadn't even thought of turning around until he said it. My fingers tightened around the receiver, and my bike seemed suddenly too far away, even though it was right at my side. I tried to laugh it off, forcing a shaky, "Very funny, Dad, you got me." But he didn't laugh. He didn't even sound like he was smiling. He said it again, sharper this time, "Don't turn around." My first instinct was to slam the receiver down and run, but my hand wouldn't move. Not really. I kept it pressed to my ear, as though I couldn't risk letting go. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm right here," he said. And the thing that made my stomach drop was the hollow echo that followed his words. It wasn't the kind of echo you get from a big room. It was the echo of a voice traveling through a tiny metal box, the exact echo I was hearing from my side of the payphone. I jerked forward instinctively, turning my head before I even realized I was doing it. But the payphone was bolted to the wall, and the only reflection I had was the greasy pane of glass in the booth. There was no one behind me. The street was empty. I heard my father's breathing still in the receiver, heavy, matching my own. "Dad, stop it. Just stop," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You need to leave," he said. "Don't come home yet." That stopped me cold. It wasn't just the strangeness of the warning, it was the fact that if this really was my father, he never would have told me not to come home. He would have driven out to get me himself. And if it wasn't him, then who was it? I hung up, the clatter of the receiver sounding too loud in the stillness. My legs were already moving before I even decided what to do. I grabbed my bike and pedaled so hard that my thighs burned. But the whole way back, every time I glanced behind me, I felt certain that someone was there, pacing me, just out of sight. When I reached our house, I didn't bother being quiet. I banged through the door, calling out for my parents. My mother was in the kitchen, startled by the noise, and when my dad appeared from the hallway, wiping his hands on a rag, everything inside me nearly collapsed in relief. He looked confused when I ran straight to him. "Why'd you say that to me?" I asked, breathless. "On the phone, at the station, you told me not to turn around." His face hardened in a way I didn't expect. He shook his head, slow at first, then more firmly. "I've been here all night. Haven't answered the phone once." My mother frowned, glancing between us. "What are you talking about? What happened?" I couldn't explain it without sounding ridiculous, so I just shook my head, trying to convince myself maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I went to my room, I couldn't shake the echo of his voice the way it matched the payphone so perfectly. A week later, curiosity gnawed at me enough to go back. I told myself I was being silly, that maybe some stranger had picked up and played a cruel joke. But the moment I reached the booth, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Scratched into the metal panel just beneath the receiver were the words, "Don't turn around." The letters were shallow but jagged, like someone had carved them in with desperation. I ran my fingers over the grooves, my pulse hammering. Someone else had heard the same words, maybe more than one someone, maybe over years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying the call, the hiss of the line, the strange certainty in his voice. I started wondering what would have happened if I had turned around right then, completely, instead of half glancing at the glass. What would I have seen? The thought burrowed deeper as days passed. I tried telling myself to let it go, but the payphone burned in my mind like a magnet. Eventually, I biked back again, this time in daylight, as though the sun might make it less terrifying. I stood there with coins in my palm, staring at the scratched words. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I fed the coins into the slot and dialed our house again. It rang once. "Hello?" It was my father again, but this time his voice was broken, trembling. "Why are you back?" My chest seized. "What do you mean, why am I back?" "You weren't supposed to return. You'll let it through now," he said, his words stumbling out like he was fighting to say them. "What's it?" I demanded. The line crackled so loudly I had to hold the receiver away. And then, underneath the static, I heard another voice, a low one, almost like a growl, shaping itself into words I couldn't quite understand, but I felt them. They pressed against my skin, made my hands shake. I dropped the phone and backed away. The receiver swung on its cord, thumping the metal, the voice still spilling out in fragments I couldn't stand to hear. I grabbed my bike and bolted, this time not looking back at all. At home, I locked the door of my room and pressed my hands to my ears, but I swore I could still hear it, like the sound had lodged itself inside me. The next morning, I told my father everything. He listened in silence, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made me think he knew more than he said. When I finished, he only put a hand on my shoulder and told me not to ever go back there. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. Years later, after I'd moved away, I came back through Invercargill for a visit. The station was still there, though the sign had been replaced, brighter and cleaner. The payphone was gone. Just a blank patch of wall remained. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead there was a hollow ache, because even though the booth was gone, I knew whatever had been on the other end of that line hadn't disappeared. It was waiting somewhere, patient, rehearsing my father's voice, practicing those same 3 words until someone new gave it a chance. And when I think about it now, what terrifies me most isn't what I heard, it's the certainty that one night, someone else will pick up, hear that voice, and decide to turn around. I wasn't supposed to be their scoutmaster. That's the truth. I was only filling in because Herr Weber, the regular leader, had broken his leg the week before. I was 26, back from university, and thought it might be good for me to spend a weekend in the mountains with the boys. A few days of hiking, campfires, and discipline. How hard could it be? When I left home that Friday, my mother reminded me to pack extra matches. When I came back, I couldn't look her in the eye. We set off from the edge of Garmisch-Partenkirchen, 7 boys between 11 and 14, all of them laughing, hitting each other with their walking sticks, chewing sweets they'd hidden from their parents. I tried to keep them in a line, but it was useless. They scattered like sparrows. I remember feeling a small rush of pride at being the one they looked to, even if they barely listened. I'd grown up in those mountains, and I told myself I could handle anything. The first hours were easy. The trail was well worn, following the side of the valley, switchbacks cutting upward through pines. I had the map folded into my pocket, checked my compass every so often. The boys were loud, too loud, and I worried about bears, though the truth was, I just wanted some peace. After lunch, things grew quieter, as the climb tired them out. That's when I first noticed something strange. It was Lucas, the youngest. He stopped in the middle of the path, head tilted, and said, "Do you hear them?" His face was pale, lips slightly open. The others laughed, asking if he meant birds, or maybe church bells echoing from the valley. But Lucas shook his head and whispered, "Voices. They're calling." I told him he was imagining things, that wind always sounds like people if you listen too hard. But when we continued, I found myself straining my ears. The woods grew denser as we climbed, the air thinner, the boys quieter. Then Jan, one of the older boys, began humming. It wasn't a tune I recognized, and I asked him what it was. He shrugged, almost embarrassed, and said, "I don't know. It just came into my head." Within minutes, 2 others were humming the same strange melody. None of them admitted to starting it. I felt a sharp unease, not terror, just the kind of prickle you get when something doesn't fit. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing where the trail split. One branch led toward the ridge, the other deeper into the woods. I knew the map we had to go left, but the boys stood, staring at the right-hand trail, eyes fixed as though they'd seen something move. Lucas pointed and said simply, "That way." The tone of his voice unsettled me more than the words. He wasn't begging or suggesting, he was certain. I tried to laugh it off. No, we're sticking to the plan. Ridge, then camp. Come on." But the boys shuffled their feet, hesitant. One even muttered that he'd heard someone calling his name from that direction. My chest tightened. I snapped at them to follow me, harsher than I intended, and after some grumbling, they obeyed. Still, the silence as we walked on felt heavy. That night, we made camp near a rocky outcrop. I set them to collecting wood, building the fire, boiling water. They worked sluggishly, as though distracted, and when I asked what was wrong, one of them, I think it was Stefan, said, "They don't want us here." I demanded to know who he meant. He wouldn't look at me, just stirred the fire with a stick. I told myself it was just boys scaring each other with ghost stories. But when darkness came, things worsened. I woke in the night to rustling outside the tent. At first I thought it was an animal. Then I heard whispers, not one voice, but several, murmuring just beyond the fabric walls. I held my breath, listening, every hair on my body standing on end. The whispers weren't in German, at least not in any dialect I knew. They were low, rhythmic, like chanting. I forced myself out, flashlight in hand. The beam swept over trees and rocks, nothing. But when I turned, I saw Lucas standing barefoot at the edge of the clearing, staring into the woods. His eyes were wide, unblinking. "They're waiting," he said. My heart pounded. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him until he blinked, until life came back into his face. He didn't even remember leaving his sleeping bag. The next morning, the boys were restless, impatient, all of them insisting we had to go the other way. I argued, threatened, even begged. But they kept glancing toward the trees, toward the path we hadn't taken, like something magnetic pulled at them. By midday, my throat was raw from shouting. Finally, I told them we'd turn back, head home early. That's when the fear in their eyes shifted to anger. "Why don't you hear them?" Jan demanded. His voice cracked. "They want us. They've been calling since yesterday. Why are you stopping us?" The others nodded, muttering agreement, their small faces twisted with confusion and defiance. I felt like I was losing them, as though invisible hands were pulling them away from me. I raised my voice again, ordered them to pack up. That was the last clear moment I remember. The rest comes to me in fragments, as though through a fog. We were on the trail again, but the boys weren't following me anymore. They were walking ahead, faster, slipping between the trees, ignoring my calls. My legs grew heavy, my chest tight, as I stumbled after them. The sound of their footsteps merged with something else, whispers, laughter, echoing all around. I shouted their names until my throat tore. At some point, I tripped, fell hard against the earth. When I lifted my head, they were gone. Just gone. No footsteps ahead, no movement in the trees. Silence so complete it rang in my ears. My mind fractured. I screamed into the woods, clawed at the ground, begged them to answer. But there was nothing. I must have wandered for hours, maybe days. The forest no longer matched my map. The paths twisted into places I didn't recognize. My compass spun. I remember laughing at it, hysterical, until I collapsed. Eventually, men found me search parties with dogs. They said I was muttering nonsense, babbling about voices. I barely recall it, only the pity in their eyes. The investigation lasted weeks. Police, volunteers, even soldiers combed the mountains. No sign of the boys was ever found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a bone. Families demanded answers. Reporters hounded me, asking what really happened. I gave them the truth, that the boys had followed voices into the woods, that something beyond me had taken them. They called me unstable, accused me of negligence, some even whispered worse. I've carried that weight for 40 years. Every time I close my eyes, I see them walking away from me, small backs vanishing into the trees. I hear Lucas whispering, "They're waiting." I hear Jan's angry voice demanding why I didn't listen. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the world is still, sometimes I hear the whispers again, faint, rhythmic, patient. You ask me how I've lived with it. The truth is, I haven't. I exist. I breathe. I eat when I can. But live? No. The mothers' faces destroyed that. The empty coffins buried that. I told you I wasn't supposed to be their scoutmaster. If Weber hadn't broken his leg, if I'd just said no, maybe those boys would still be alive. Or maybe not. Maybe it was always waiting for them, and I was just the unlucky witness. But when I close my eyes and hear the voices, I know this. They didn't die. They followed. And they are still following, somewhere in those mountains, walking endlessly towards something I'll never understand. And God help me, sometimes I wish I'd followed too. I was standing on my porch when he called out from across the fence, waving one hand like he'd just found gold. "You've got a ladder, right?" His name was Gareth. Mid-40s, bit scruffy, always smelled faintly of sawdust and smoke. We'd only spoken twice before the earthquake hit Christchurch. That February, just polite nods when putting out the bins. But after the quake, everyone talked more. Everyone leaned on everyone. Survival does that. He said his roof had cracked near the guttering and rain was leaking in. He looked shaken but harmless, and honestly, I wanted to help. My own house had taken a few hits, chimney gone, kitchen cracked but still standing. "Sure," I told him. "Take it. Just bring it back when you're done." He grinned, said, "You're a lifesaver," and carried it off, boots crunching on broken tiles and grit. I didn't think much of it then. We were all helping someone. That's what people did. The next morning, he came back to thank me. I was sitting on the step with a mug of instant coffee, and he leaned against my fence, smiling like we were old mates. He said he'd fixed the leak, but asked if I knew how to replace a few shingles. I didn't, really, but I offered to look up a tutorial if the internet was working again. He laughed, said not to bother, and told me I should stop by for tea sometime once things settled down. I agreed half-heartedly and went back inside. 3 days later, I heard yelling. Not angry, yelling panic. It was his voice. I ran out, thinking something collapsed again. He was outside his gate, sweating, wild-eyed. "Have you seen her?" he asked. "Fiona, next door to me. You know, the lady with the dog?" I didn't. He said she hadn't been home all night, and her car was gone. "She was supposed to come for tea," he muttered, rubbing his face. "We were gonna talk about roof repairs. She never showed." I offered to help, look, but he shook his head, muttering that he'd already called her daughter. It was chaos that week. Aftershocks rattled the city every few hours, streets split open, everyone displaced. Missing people weren't rare. But something about his panic stuck with me. It wasn't fear, it was performative. Too loud, too fast. The next evening, I saw police cars parked near his house. One officer knocked on my door. He asked if I'd seen Fiona, the missing woman. I said no, but mentioned Gareth had borrowed my ladder to help her with her roof. The officer nodded slowly, wrote that down, and thanked me. 2 days later, the ladder still wasn't back. That bothered me more than it should have. It was old but sturdy, my father's ladder, the one he used when painting our first house. I decided to go ask for it. His house looked worse than mine, cracks along the walls, roof patched with blue tarps, the front door hanging slightly crooked. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. But the door wasn't locked, and part of me thought maybe he was hurt or trapped. I called his name and stepped inside. It smelled wrong, like rotten bleach at the same time. The living room was cluttered: buckets, wet towels, bits of broken plaster everywhere. On the table there were 3 mugs, all stained brown inside, and one had lipstick on the rim. My stomach twisted. Fiona's? Maybe. I called out again, louder this time. No response. I backed out quickly, shut the door, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. That night, I heard footsteps in my backyard. Slow, heavy ones. I peeked through the curtains and saw a flashlight beam sweep across my fence. Gareth's shape, unmistakable, tall, thin shoulders, that limp in his right leg. He was standing near my shed, looking around. I opened the door and called out, "Everything okay?" He jumped like I'd caught him stealing, muttered something about checking for gas leaks. There were no gas lines near my shed. I told him to leave, and he shuffled off without another word. I barely slept. Something gnawed at me. The next morning, I went to the shed to check. Nothing was missing, but the ground was disturbed, damp, compressed, like someone had walked there repeatedly or dug something up and covered it. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My neighbor borrowed my ladder, and maybe he's creeping around my yard? In a city falling apart, it sounded ridiculous. 2 nights later, I saw the police again. More cars, this time further down the road. Word spread fast. Fiona's car had been found. Abandoned in an empty lot on the outskirts of town. Driver's door open, keys still inside. No sign of her. People whispered that someone had seen Gareth talking to her the day she disappeared. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the timing or the fact that my ladder was gone. A week passed. I was sweeping my porch when Gareth came walking down the street, calm as ever. He waved like nothing had happened. I forced a smile. "Still got my ladder?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He stopped, blinked, and said, "Oh yeah, mate. Sorry, been meaning to return it." His eyes darted slightly, like he was calculating something. "Tell you what, I'll bring it over tonight." He didn't. The next morning, I found muddy footprints near my fence again, larger than mine, same tread pattern from his boots. That's when I decided to call the police myself. They sent a young constable who listened patiently as I explained everything: the ladder, the footprints, his strange behavior, the smell inside his house. He thanked me, said they'd look into it. But I could tell by his face that, in a city full of missing people, mine was just one more odd story. Still, it must have triggered something, because later that day, 2 detectives came knocking. They asked for permission to search my property, just in case. I agreed immediately. They walked around, checked the shed, the fence, the back gate. When they finished, one of them asked if I could describe the ladder. "Aluminum, double fold, bit of red paint on one side," I said. "Belonged to my dad." They nodded, wrote it down, and left. That evening, Gareth came over again, no ladder, no explanation. Just stood at my fence, hands in pockets. "Cops asked me questions today," he said, smiling faintly. "Told them you said I took your ladder." I swallowed hard. "You did," I said. "You still have it." He laughed softly, then leaned in closer. "You shouldn't talk to them so much. They twist things, you know?" His voice dropped lower. "They'll make you say things you didn't mean." Then he walked away. I locked every window that night. Couldn't shake the feeling he'd be back. Around midnight, I heard a metallic clank from outside, like aluminum scraping concrete. I peeked through the blinds. He was standing in my yard again, holding the ladder upright against the fence. He didn't move for a while, just stared toward my kitchen window. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving it behind. I waited until morning to go outside. The ladder was there, wet with dew, a dark smear along one side. Looked like dried mud or something worse. I touched it and felt something sticky. I dropped it immediately, heart racing. I called the police again. This time, they came fast. They took the ladder, swabbed it, took photos of the footprints around it. One of them asked if Gareth had threatened me. I said not directly, but he'd made me uncomfortable. They told me to stay with family for a few nights if I could. I packed a bag that afternoon. 2 days later, the news broke. Human remains found in post-quake debris near Bexley. The body hadn't been buried, it had been stuffed inside a collapsed garage wall. They didn't say her name at first, but everyone knew. Fiona, the woman next door to Gareth. The next morning, the police were back. They asked for another statement, wanted details of every interaction I'd had with him. I told them everything. They said they'd found fingerprints on Fiona's car, his and mine. That stopped me cold. Mine? They explained the car had been parked near where my ladder was taken, and apparently, traces of aluminum dust were on the handle. Meaning my ladder had been used maybe to load or move something heavy. I couldn't breathe for a moment, thinking how easily suspicion could turn. I told them the truth, that I'd never gone near that car, never even met Fiona. They assured me they didn't suspect me but wanted to be thorough. Gareth, meanwhile, was missing. His house was empty when they raided it. No personal items, no tools, nothing but a half-packed suitcase and a single mug on the counter. That's when I realized the lipstick stain from before was gone. The city was still in ruins, but suddenly everyone was talking about him. The Quake opportunist, they called him. People remembered odd things, missing tools, women he'd helped with repairs, a rumor that he'd done jail time years earlier under another name. The police eventually confirmed he'd been a handyman with a record for theft and assault, living under an alias since being released. A week later, they found him. Or rather, what was left of him. His body had washed up near the Avon River, trapped under debris. No sign of struggle, no note, just gone. They said he likely fell during another aftershock while hiding. But that never sat right with me. The police closed the case, ruled it an accidental death. Fiona's murder unresolved but strongly linked to him. For a while, people left flowers outside her house. Then, as time passed, they stopped. Christchurch moved on, rebuilt, healed. But I couldn't. The guilt settled deep in me. I'd lent him that ladder. My ladder. My hands were part of that story, whether I liked it or not. I kept thinking, if I hadn't trusted him, maybe she'd still be alive. Maybe I'd noticed sooner, called sooner, done something. Months later, when the city finally cleared debris and reopened the street, I went back to check my shed again. The ground where he'd walked was overgrown now, weeds pushing through cracks. But near the fence, I saw something half buried, a bit of blue tarp, brittle from the sun. I tugged it loose. Beneath it, buried shallow in the soil, was a single glove. Women's size, pale pink, stained dark around the fingers. I didn't tell anyone. I just buried it deeper, tamped the soil flat, and walked back inside. I couldn't bear another investigation, another reminder that I'd missed all the signs. Instead, I told myself, maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe it was from the quake, or left by a volunteer, or from anywhere else. I let that lie settle over me like dust. But sometimes, when I step outside at night, I still smell that faint mix of bleach and earth. It comes when the wind shifts just right, like something turning in the soil, reminding me. And even now, years later, whenever someone borrows anything from me, I write their name down, date, time, item. I can't stop myself. Because I know how something small, something simple, like lending a ladder, can pull you into someone else's nightmare before you even realize you're part of it. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.